Yeah.
Jesse, you mind if I advance that one slide to make sure it's
Yeah. Actually. We have to.
beautiful? What I need is more appreciating.
Yesterday I tried to
Chris, remind me to tell you the story later.
It doesn't hurt.
Interesting.
It's not the way.
Not fish related. No, just yeah, just a story about someone we know way back when. In terms of that. Not good.
It's
gotta be, it's gotta be.
Appreciate it.
How does it?
So we should get started since it's a couple minutes after 6. And so this is the October 9th meeting of the Southern Regional Advisory Committee to the Marine Fisheries Commission. And what we'll do first is before we approve the agenda and the minutes, maybe we can just do a quick introduction. Everyone who's here and a member of the advisory committee. So I'm Fred Scharf. I'm a professor of fisheries biology at UNCW, and I serve as the chair of the committee.
I'm Tom Smith. I'm the vice chair of the committee. Officially retired from work. I was a banker and at one time financed a lot of seafood operations on the East Coast and Gulf Coast, processors. And now I'm a recreational fisherman and actually the mayor pro tem of the town of Weddington, North Carolina. And I hold a 50-ton master's license, so I know how to drive a boat.
Jason Fowler from Steve's Ferry. Do a lot of recreational fishing, a lot of friends and family that run a lot of piers up and down Topsail Island.
Ken Ziegler, Bear Creek. Commercial fisherman. Been fishing for right at 50 years now.
It only feels like 51.
It might be.
Jeremy Skinner, I served on the Spotted Sea Trout Advisory Committee and on this one as well. And I'm from Carter County.
Ed Morris. I'm also from Carteret County and associated with the commercial fishing industry, and I served as an advisor since 1997.
Good to see you, Pam.
Sam Boyce, I'm from Wilmington and I'm representing recreation fishermen.
Good to see you, Sam. Also wanted to recognize that we have 2 members of the Marine Fisheries Commission that are in attendance tonight. So Mr. Sam Corbett is here this evening, as well as Mr. William Service is here this evening. So thank you guys for both being here. And also just to acknowledge that the Division of Marine Fisheries Director, Director Rawls is in the back there. So folks, if you haven't had a chance, say hello to Dr. Rawls. And Director Rawls. She's probably Dr. Rawls too. I'll say Director. I know. So first order of business is just to approve the agenda. Each of you should have received a copy of the agenda. So we're going to receive a presentation on the draft spotted sea trout fishery management plan amendment 1. Have some opportunity for public comment. We can ask some clarifying questions. And then we'll vote to recommend some management options to the commission based on the expertise of the folks on this committee. So can I have an approval of
Make
the
a motion,
agenda?
we approve the agenda.
We have a second.
I'll second.
So we have a motion, second. All in favor of the agenda? See no opposition. And then we also had minutes from the April meeting, which we couldn't vote on last time because we didn't have a quorum in person, right? Or we were still in the transition. So, but now we do have a quorum here in person, so we can vote to approve the April minutes, which was provided to us in our last package, right, in the previous meeting. Did anybody have any issues with the April meeting minutes? I looked at them and didn't see anything, so. Motion to approve those.
I'll make a motion.
Second.
Jason. Anybody opposed to the approval of the minutes? So the primary item on the agenda from the staff is to provide an overview of the management plan and amendment 1 and the preliminary recommendations from the division. And we'll hear that from two of the folks from both Lucas and Melinda from the division staff that have worked on this amendment 1. And Jason Rock is here as well, as part of the stock assessment for speckled trout, so has some understanding of that assessment as well.
All right. Good evening, committee members. We really appreciate the chance to be up here tonight, review Amendment 1 with y'all. I'm Lucas Pensinger, a biologist out of the Moorhead City office. And up here with me is Melinda Lambert, and she's a biologist out of the Manio office. We're the co-leads for this fishery management plan. So our presentation today is going to focus on viewing the draft of Amendment 1. And then after that presentation, we'd be happy to answer any questions that you all might have. And then your action item is for the advisory committee to vote on management recommendation to deliver to the Marine Fisheries Commission. So Melinda and I will present any recommendations that you all vote on and any public comment that we hear throughout this process to the commission at their November business meeting, where they're slated to select their preferred management option. So first though, dang, just kidding. There we go. Okay, first, I'd just like to review where we are in the fishery management plan process. So here we're just looking at the timeline of a management plan from that initial public scoping stage the whole way through implementation of management strategies. Our current step is noted with that yellow chevron, a little over halfway down the page there. And I promise you are probably going to get sick of hearing this tonight, but at this point, the Amendment 1 draft and the preliminary division management recommendations included in it are still in the drafting stage. So those preliminary recommendations are subject to change based on the input we receive from the public and from you all here tonight. And then we have one more advisory committee meeting next Tuesday. So again, that action item is to vote for you all to vote on recommended management actions to send to the commission. So then as I mentioned on a previous page at their November business meeting, the commission will select their preliminary management option or their preferred management option, I should say. And then at their February 2025 business meeting, the commission is scheduled to vote on final adoption of the plan. There we go. So before we get to that action item, I do want to start by reviewing just kind of the overall structure of Amendment 1 and then cover what's contained and discussed within each of the major sections. Then we'll review each of those sections in a little more detail, starting with the base plan, then an overview of the information in the issue papers, the division's preliminary management recommendations, and we'll finish up just by touching base on that timeline moving forward. So the base plan provides a lot of the background information for Amendment 1. It includes things like the goal and objectives of the plan, spotted sea trout life history, the management unit that we're talking about, a characterization of the recreational and commercial fisheries, and then a summary of the 2020 spotted sea trout stock assessment and the stock status. I will try to touch on those very briefly today, but they are covered, every one of those topics is covered in a whole lot more detail within the base plan. So the commission approved the goal and objectives of Amendment 1 at their May 2023 business meeting. And the goal of this plan is to manage the spotted sea trout fishery to maintain a self-sustaining population that provides sustainable harvest based on science-based decision-making processes. For the management unit, we're looking at all spotted sea trout within the coastal and joint fishing waters of North Carolina. So spotted sea trout are distributed pretty much coast-wide in North Carolina, and they're found everywhere from the rivers, sound, and marshes to the ocean. And while they generally reside in estuarine waters for their entire life cycle, they do have some seasonal migration patterns. So in the winter, they move south and aggregate in the creeks and bays of the upper estuary. And in the spring and the summer, they move north and spread back out into the rivers and sounds. In North Carolina, the spotted sea trout fishery is predominantly a recreational fishery. So here we're looking at recreational and commercial landings from biological years 1991 to 2023. The biological year is just from March through February of the following year. So biological year 2023 is going to be from March of 2023 through February of 2024. The height of each bar is total landings in that year. And then the yellow portion of the bar is commercial landings, and the purple portion of the bar is recreational landings. So since current management was fully put into place in 2012, recreational harvest has accounted for about 86% of total harvest. Commercial harvest has accounted for the other 14%. Landings in both sectors are pretty variable, but the general trend of recreational landings has increased throughout time, especially in the recent years, with periods of very low harvest in both sectors following cold stones. So these red arrows that I've added to the graph here are showing those years that the director closed the spotted sea trout fishery due to a cold stone. Landings in both sectors increased pretty dramatically in 2019, and they really remained high through 2022. In 2023, however, recreational landings did decrease pretty sharply. Commercial landings also decreased in 2023, although that drop wasn't quite as steep as what we saw recreationally. It's really hard to say exactly why landings were down in last year. And really, that's just because it's unlikely that drop was due to any one reason. It's probably a multitude of reasons. So this graph is just pulling out the recreational portion of landings, and it shows the average percent of recreational landings by month since 2012, which again, that represents that current period of spotted sea trout management. Recreational harvest occurs pretty much year round, though most harvest does occur in the late fall. And there may be some minor regional differences in these patterns, but broadly they're pretty true, or they're pretty consistent across the state. About 70% of recreational harvest occurs in that peak October to February season. There's a small bump in landings that we can see in June and July on that graph, and that's likely due to tourism and vacationing anglers. So we see a very similar pattern in the commercial fishery. So this graph is just pulling out the commercial portion now, and it's showing the percent of commercial landings by month, again, for that same time period of current management since 2012. So similar to the recreational fishery, we see that large peak in the fall, and that extends into the winter. About 71% of commercial harvest occurs in those months. So harvest of spotted sea trout remains a little bit higher in the colder months as fish aggregate into those smaller water bodies where they overwinter, and they can potentially be landed in larger numbers. And then harvest tends to decline as the water's warm and the fish disperse. On this graph, we're showing the proportion of commercial landings by gear type. So the color of the bar corresponds to the gear type used to land the spotted sea trout. Historically, anchored gill nets, which are that light blue portion in the bottom of each bar, were the predominant gear used in the fishery. In more recent years, though, runaround gill nets, which are the gray portion toward the top of the bars, have become the most common gear. And you can see that trend as we move from left to right on the graph. You can see that the blue bars representing anchored gill nets get smaller as we head toward the right, and then those gray bars are taking up a larger portion of the graph as the landings from runaround nets get larger. So then a single asterisk on 2016, 18, and 20 represent years that beach seine landings are combined with other years. And then the double asterisk on 22 is showing when beach and hull seine landings were combined with other years. And that's just because of data confidentiality. So there are limited participants in those fisheries. So if y'all have been listening into commission meetings, you're probably sick of hearing me talk about this. But I did want to briefly remind everybody of the stock status of spotted sea trout. And we'll start with whether or not the stock is overfished. That's the good news, because in the final year of the stock assessment, spawning stock biomass, or SSB, was well above the threshold SSB, which means that the stock is not overfished. So in other words, there's plenty of mature female fish available to sustain the population. However, this graph is showing the overfishing status of spotted sea trout, and the individual points, those are the ratio of estimated fishing mortality, or F, to the 20% F threshold. So F is the rate at which fishing activities are removing fish from the population. And that solid black line at 1 is the maximum ratio where fishing mortality is sustainable. So in other words, we want to see points where that ratio is below the black line. But if we focus in on that final year of the stock assessment, the ratio is above the black line, which means that overfishing is occurring. So long story short, there's plenty of biomass to sustain the spotted sea trout fishery, but we're fishing them at an unsustainable rate. To keep spotted sea trout biomass at the levels that support the great fishery that we've had in recent years, we need to end overfishing by reducing fishing mortality. So for the rest of today's presentation, we'll focus on the appendices of Amendment 1, which include discussions of management options to end overfishing, as well as discussions of supporting information and other options that might benefit the stock. I'll start with Appendix 1, which is an information paper characterizing small mesh gill nets in the spotted sea trout fishery. So at their August 2021 business meeting, the Marine Fisheries Commission passed the motion to not initiate rulemaking on small mesh gill nets, but to instead refer the issue through the FMP process for each species, and for any issues or rules coming out of those species-specific FMPs to be addressed at that time. So since in North Carolina, small mesh gill nets are the predominant gear used to harvest spotted sea trout, per direction of the commission, small mesh gill nets must be addressed during the review of the spotted sea trout FMP. So the information paper presents details to guide the potential management measures that are discussed in the sustainable harvest issue paper. And this includes how things like mesh size restrictions, trip limits, and yardage limits could be expected to impact spotted sea trout harvest and bycatch in both the spotted sea trout and small mesh fishery. In both the spotted sea trout small mesh fishery, but also in other small mesh fisheries that harvest spotted sea trout incidentally. So probably the best example of both of those with spotted sea trout is the striped mullet fishery. Especially in the fall, striped mullet are the primary incidental catch in the spotted sea trout fishery, and vice versa. Spotted sea trout are the primary incidental catch in the striped mullet small mesh fishery. So the information paper also discusses ways to mitigate user group conflict to the greatest extent possible. And just to give a quick example of how this information paper can inform sustainable harvest, this figure that we're looking at here on the right is showing the relationship of stretched mesh size to the total length of spotted sea trout sampled in our commercial fish house sampling. The solid black line is a trend line that's shown for reference, and the slope of that trend line, which is how steep or shallow it is, shows the strength of the relationship between fish length and stretched mesh size. And what we see here is that trend line just isn't very steep, which means that for spotted sea trout, the relationship between fish length and mesh size isn't very strong. It's what we would call a weak relationship. So in other words, small mesh gill nets do a pretty good job of avoiding catching sublegal spotted sea trout. But once spotted sea trout reach that legal size, small mesh gill nets probably don't do a very good job of selectively harvesting those legal sized fish based on size. And it's likely because of spotted sea trout body type and shape. They're a softer body fish, and the larger fish aren't necessarily as deep as larger fish of other species. So to kind of complete that link between this small mesh information paper and the sustainable harvest issue paper, this graph can be used to inform the effectiveness of using mesh sizes, mesh size changes to try and reduce discards that could result from any management changes. So Appendix 2 is the sustainable harvest issue paper. The North Carolina Fisheries Reform Act requires management measures to be implemented to address overfishing as determined by the peer-reviewed spotted sea trout stock assessment. Management measures discussed in this issue paper are quantifiable, and they're projected to meet the required reduction in spotted sea trout harvest, again, based on that terminal year of the stock assessment. So at least a 19.9% harvest reduction is needed, is required to meet the fishing mortality or F threshold, while a 53.9% harvest reduction would get us to the, would reach the F target. Harvest reductions in this issue paper are based on harvest from 2019 to 2022. This graph is currently empty, so it doesn't really show much yet. But what we're going to show here is the probability of spawning stock biomass, or SSB, staying above the SSB target under various levels of fishing mortality. So again, just as a reminder, that fishing mortality is the rate at which fishing activities are removing fish from the population. So the x-axis, which is the years along the bottom, begins at 2020, and that's because the terminal year of the stock assessment was 2019, and we're projecting the spawning stock biomass forward from that time through 2035. And I do want to mention these projections that we'll talk about here today assume that there will be no cold stun events within the projected time series, which quite frankly is probably unrealistic, but also that recruitment stays consistent. I specifically want to show the probability of spawning stock biomass staying above the target because in North Carolina, that was the state of the spotted sea trout fishery in the final year of the stock assessment. And if there is one thing that we have heard loud and clear during this amendment process, it's that people are really happy with the state of the spotted sea trout fishery right now. So management that keeps spotted sea trout biomass above the target should keep the population at those levels that people are currently enjoying. So the red line represents a 50% chance that SSB will stay above the target. If that probability falls below 50%, the FRA defines management as unlikely to succeed. The dashed black line represents a 75% chance that SSB will stay above the target. Above that line, there's a real high probability of the fishery continuing in its current state. Between the dashed black and solid red line, we're still above that 50% FRA definition of whether management is likely to succeed, but we are getting into that territory where we should probably be cautious. So over the next few slides, I'm going to add different lines for different rates of fishing mortality. Each line is going to show the probability of spotted sea trout spawning stock biomass staying above that target if that rate of fishing mortality continues. So in other words, we can kind of think of each line as the probability that the spotted sea trout fishery remains in that current state that people are happy with. So this light blue line is the rate of fishing mortality in the terminal year of the stock assessment. There are a lot of things that go into that rate year to year, but we can kind of think of this as a snapshot of the current fishing mortality rate. If we continue harvesting spotted sea trout at that rate, projections show a steep decline in SSB, with SSB likely falling below the target. Long term, there would be less than a 50% chance that SSB stays above the target. This means there's a very good chance that at the current rate at which we're fishing in the terminal year of the stock assessment, that would cause SSB to drop well below the current levels. Although SSB would still remain above the threshold. This purple line represents the probability of SSB staying above the target under the threshold fishing mortality rate. So if you remember reducing F to the threshold, that would take the 19.9% harvest reduction I mentioned earlier. Probability of SSB staying above the target eventually settles right around 70%. So in other words, if we reduce harvest by 19.9%, there's about a 70% chance that SSB stays above the target. And then finally, this black line at the top there represents the probability of SSB staying above the target if we reduce harvest to meet the target fishing mortality rate. So reducing after the target, that would require the 53.9% reduction that we mentioned earlier. At the F target, the probability of SSB staying above that target level, so again, at that current level that people are enjoying, is basically 100%. So in other words, if we reduce total harvest by 53.9%, there's a great chance that SSB remains at that level that leads to a fishery that folks are really enjoying. Now, I know there's a lot going on with this slide, and it's you know, it was a complicated build, but there are a couple of things that I'd like y'all to focus. So first, under the current fishing mortality rate, it's highly unlikely that SSB stays at the level that folks are so happy with. Second, the threshold fishing mortality rate, or that purple line, it does keep us above the 50% red line. But the probability of SSB staying above the target falls into that area between 50 and 75%, where we might want to be a bit cautious. And then finally, management that reduces harvest so that F falls somewhere in between the threshold and the target. In other words, a harvest reduction somewhere in between 19.9% and 53.9% should give us a high probability of SSB staying above the target, which is a perfect segue into the management options that we explored in Amendment 2, or Appendix 2, I should say. Kind of fast forward us way too many years down the line right now. So as I mentioned before, the specific management measures discussed in the Sustainable Harvest Issue Paper, they're quantifiable and they're projected to meet the required reduction in spotted sea trout harvest based on the stock assessment terminal year. So these options have been refined based on input from the Spotted Sea Trout Advisory Committee during that spring workshop, the Spotted Sea Trout Plan Development Team, the Marine Fisheries Commission, and input from the public. Options to achieve sustainable harvest include changes to size limits, season closures, changes to recreational bag limits and commercial trip limits, management of the Bogue Bank stop net fishery, and combinations of the above management measures. So current spotted sea trout management is a great example of combination management, combined size limits, trip limits, bag limits, and area closures to commercial harvest in joint waters on the weekends. So combining multiple strategies. We also looked at updating the adaptive management framework. So adaptive management just allows the division to adjust management measures if the management strategies that are implemented in Amendment 1 aren't achieving their intended purpose. So the management measures that can be adjusted through adaptive management is things like season closures, day of the week closures, bag and trip limits, size limits, and gear restrictions in support of those other measures. That process starts with the division evaluating the management strategies through things like our indices of abundance, the length frequencies of fish in the from our independent sampling, and also length frequencies from dependent sampling, and then age structures from independent and dependent sampling. So all of these metrics that I just mentioned are all reported in our annual FMP update. If it appears that the management strategies implemented in Amendment 1 are not achieving sustainable harvest, then the division can revise the management strategy using adaptive management. So the next two slides are adapted from Table 2.9 in Appendix 2, which is on page 64 of the Amendment 1 draft. Table 2.9 summarizes the management options presented in the Sustainable Harvest Issue Paper for your consideration. And I've highlighted the division's preliminary management recommendation on these slides, but all of these options are presented in a lot more detail in Appendix 2. So there are options for changes to the minimum and maximum size limit and season closures. And there are also options for changes to the recreational bag and commercial trip limits, management of the Bogue Bank stop net fishery, combinations of individual management options, and an updated adaptive management framework. So at this point, I'd like to turn things over to Melinda, and she'll go over the rest of the issue papers and then the division's initial management recommendations.
All right, thanks, Lucas. I'll start with Appendix 3, which looks at supplemental management options for spotted sea trout. Supplemental options are ideas that would probably benefit the population, but the extent of that benefit isn't quantifiable. We can't calculate it. The supplemental management options include things like vessel limits. Vessel limits could be used to limit the number of spotted sea trout harvested per vessel, or could be used to limit or eliminate the captain crew allowance on for-hire trips. They also include effort controls, In theory, effort controls could be used to limit the entry into the spotted sea trout fishery, but the bar to limit entry is really high, and it's unlikely that the spotted sea trout fishery reaches or meets that bar. Gear requirements, like requiring circle hooks with live or natural baits, eliminating treble hooks, or requiring rubberized landing nets, and tournaments. The possibility of regulating fishing tournaments in some manner are also discussed in this issue paper. Both gear requirements and managing tournaments are complicated only because implementing management for these in the spotted sea trout fishery would likely affect a variety of other fisheries as well. Finally, this issue paper discusses the commercial hook and line harvest of spotted sea trout. This is another area where management could have widespread effects beyond the spotted sea trout fishery. Appendix 3 discusses all of these options at length and discusses DMF's initial recommendations. The slide is adapted from Table 3.2 in Appendix 3, which can be found on page 74 of the Amendment 1 draft, and it summarizes the management options in the supplemental harvest issue paper. Again, the preliminary division recommendation here is highlighted in blue. These options are discussed in more detail in Appendix 3 and include options for a vessel limit and for eliminating the for-hire captain crew allowance for spotted sea trout. The final appendix we'll review tonight is Appendix 4, which looks at management in the event of a severe cold stun. Currently, the director can close the spotted sea trout fishery by proclamation through June 15th in the event of a severe cold stun, which allows surviving fish a chance to spawn before being subject to harvest. This issue paper also discusses additional management options on top of the seasonal closure through June 15th. Management options include extending that seasonal closure through more of the spawning season, size limits, commercial trip and recreational bag limits, or an adaptive management framework, which would allow the director more flexibility in reacting to severe cold stuns. The adaptive management framework would allow the division to adjust management measures if a cold stun was especially severe. Management measures that could be adjusted through cold stun adaptive management specifically include temporary measures like season closures, day of the week closures, bag and trip limits, size limits, and gill net yardage restrictions. The cold stun adaptive management process would start with the division evaluating the cold stun by analyzing water temperatures, reviewing cold stun reports, and using on-site data collected by division staff. It would also include the analysis of our fisheries independent data, looking at the indices of abundance and lake frequencies from our sampling. If a cold stun was deemed especially severe, then the director can implement temporary management measures using this adaptive management framework. This slide is adapted from Table 4.1 of Appendix 4 with the preliminary division recommendation again highlighted in blue. This table can be found on page 83, and it summarizes the management options in the cold stun management issue paper. These options include extending the season closure, size limits, bag and trip limits, and adapting that adaptive management framework. We include preliminary DMF recommendations in the draft amendment so that the public and standing advisory committees provide their specific input on these recommendations. Much like the options considered in each of the issue papers, these recommendations were refined using input from the Spotted Sea Trout Advisory Committee and the MFC. In developing these recommendations, we considered management across both the spotted sea trout and striped mullet fisheries because of the similarities in seasonality and gear types between the two fisheries. We also aim to strike a balance between access to the fishery for both sectors, the potential for recoupment of harvest, the biology of spotted sea trout, and the necessary reductions to end overfishing, and maintaining that current abundance of spotted sea trout available. I will reiterate that we are still in the drafting phase of Amendment 1. This amendment, including our preliminary recommendations, are subject to change based on the input we receive from the public and from the standing and regional advisory committees. So starting with Appendix 2, the Sustainable Harvest Issue Paper. Remember that management measures discussed in this issue paper are quantifiable and are projected to meet the required reduction in the spotted sea trout harvest based on that terminal year of the stock assessment. Preliminary DMF management recommendation to achieve sustainable harvest is for a January through February statewide closure for both sectors, a 14 to 20 inch recreational slot limit, the allowance for one fish, 26 inches, a 3 fish recreational bag limit, and a commercial harvest closure from 11:59 p.m. Friday to 12:01 a.m. Tuesday, October through December. This mirrors that fall weekend closure recently adopted in the Amendment 2 of the striped mullet FMP. Additionally, the preliminary division management recommendation is for no changes to the quota in the Bogue Banks stop net fishery, but to formalize that management of the fishery in Amendment 1. And then finally, the preliminary division recommendation is to adopt that adaptive management framework to allow the division to respond more quickly and ensure sustainability goals are met. As Lucas mentioned before, the spotted sea trout fishery is recreationally dominated. Since current management was put into place in 2012, recreational harvest has accounted for about 86% of total harvest, and commercial has accounted for about 14%. So here we're showing the reductions in pounds of harvest and percent for each sector, as well as the total harvest reduction we expect from our preliminary recommendations. Pounds of harvest is based on that average harvest from 2019 to 2022. The preliminary recommendations from that previous slide would result in a recreational harvest reduction of just over 1.3 million pounds, or 39.5%, while the commercial harvest would be reduced by about 228,000 pounds, or 40.2%. This would combine to a total harvest reduction of 39.6%. When we look at the breakdown of each sector's contribution to the total harvest reduction, we see that it aligns almost exactly with the proportion of total harvest, making these reductions equitable. Preliminary division recommendation in Appendix 3 is to eliminate the captain crew allowance for spotted sea trout. This idea did have some support from the for-hire industry and would stop the practice of harvesting multiple captain crew limits in a day. The preliminary recommendation for cold stun management is to extend the harvest closure in the event of a severe cold stun through June 30th and adopting that cold stun adaptive management framework. Extending the closure through June 30th protects spotted sea trout that survive that cold stun through the entire first peak of spawning. The adaptive management framework would allow the division flexibility in responding to that exceptionally bad cold stun. Finally, I'd like to remind everyone again of where we are in the FMP process. As we've mentioned a couple times today, the Amendment 1 draft and preliminary recommendations included in it are still in the drafting stage and subject to change based on the input we receive from you all and from the public. Your action item today is for the advisory committee to vote on management recommendation to deliver to the MFC. We will deliver this recommendation to the Marine Fisheries Commission at their November meeting, where they will select their preferred management option. At this point, we are happy to answer any questions you might have about the presentation today or about Amendment 1 to the Spotted Sea Trout Fishery Management Plan.
Super. Thanks, Lucas and Melinda. So what we'll do now is have a period for clarifying questions from the committee members for Lucas and Melinda. They're not going anywhere, so they'll be here to talk stuff. So let's focus, let's limit this. So what I'm asking is for folks to limit this time right now to questions for them about the presentations. We're not making motions. We're not giving opinions, right? We're just going to ask them questions about this presentation or the stats of the stock. Then we'll start our discussions about potential management options that we would like to. I just don't want to conflate those two topics, okay? I have a few clarifying questions to start with. So current bag limit is 4 recreational.
Yep.
Okay. Minimum size is 14.
14 inches.
Okay. And the closure after a cold stun right now goes through when?
June 15th.
June 15th. So it would just be extending it for 2 weeks further.
Mhm.
That's not a period that has a tremendous amount of effort during June.
No, right.
Relatively speaking.
Exactly.
And it's not a significant amount of time, but it does go through the entirety of that first peak in spawning.
August and September.
Absolutely. Yes.
First peak is the key word.
Yeah.
And again, this would put us where on the percentage of success level at this 39 point whatever percent.
Above 70%.
It
I
would,
can't tell you. No, go ahead.
I was gonna say, it would be between that purple line and that black line that
Yeah.
we just showed.
I can't tell you exactly where it would fall on that, but we would have to calculate the actual F rate through the stock assessment.
But it's
Mine,
substantial
yes, it would-
increases above
yes.
50%.
Yes.
19% reduction would still be above threshold.
Yeah.
But just below the purple line.
So the 19%,
It is the purple line.
the 19.9% reduction, yeah, is the purple. Unless I'm confusing my lines.
He's going back to it.
Did you look at anything, in other words, we got a 14-inch size limit now. Did you look at anything, any tests or whatnot on it to 15-inch?
Yeah, yeah. We looked at, there's, I don't remember what table it is off the top of my head, but we have
You stated that moving the size of it really wasn't gonna drive this thing.
so it would take to end overfishing through size limits alone would take a very tight slot limit. It's doable, but it's a tight slot limit.
If you honor it.
Quite frankly, prior to the Spotted Sea Trout AC meeting, I would have said it was an unrealistic slot limit.
Yes.
But that workshop did change my mind on that a little bit with how realistic folks, at least the folks in that meeting, considered a tight slot limit. There was some interest in that. So I don't know that I would call it unrealistic anymore. But definitely it's tough.
But you're definitely gonna create a significant amount of discard. It's gonna be added to the discard that we already have. If you increase the size, you'll increase the discard.
Yeah, yep.
Well,
Changing the size limit would, I mean, really any management change is you are going to increase discards, but you're taking fish from a pool where 100% of them are harvested. So, you know, when you reduce that harvest, you're shifting them from that 100% dead removed from the population to 10% of those discards. We estimate end up dying from that fishing interaction. So it's still a drastic reduction. In removals.
why wouldn't you just shift it all the way up to the upper end and just have the maximum size? Instead of a slot.
So you're saying no minimum size?
I'm not saying anything. I'm just asking you, what would be the effect instead of having a slot limit, is to move it up to a maximum size limit?
So just the maximum size limit, I'm a little confused, Ken, whether you're talking about increasing the minimum size or getting rid of the minimum size and setting just the maximum size.
No, I'm
Does
saying,
that make?
I'm saying leave the minimum size exactly where it's at.
Okay, and add a maximum.
That would-
So that would be a slot limit. That is a slot limit. A slot limit, it says there's a minimum size. Below that, you can't harvest it. There's a slot where you can harvest fish. And then above that maximum size limit, you can't harvest
Okay,
fish.
so
Now, in this case, there is a trophy allowance for one fish over 26 inches. A true, pure slot limit that wouldn't be allowed. But there's minimal harvest of fish that size already. So it really doesn't make, it's, a couple tenths of a percent.
Well, it would seem to me those would be the older fish and more important to the stock.
So they do, on a individual basis. Absolutely. Those bigger fish on an individual basis, we would expect have a larger contribution to the stock. But the flip side of that is that there aren't that many of them. So there's there's some question whether the collective output of a whole lot of smaller fish versus the collective output of very, very few bigger fish, and which one of those contributes more towards the stock. And for spotted sea trout, that research just hasn't been done.
With a smaller fish, you might get 1 or 2 shots out of a season, the spawning season. And they're 100,000, 200,000 eggs. But
Yeah, they spawn less often and less eggs.
with the larger fish, you're looking at a fish that'll spawn 50 times now. 50 times, imagine that in one season. So she goes out, has a cycle, comes back, goes out, has a cycle, comes back. It would seem to me that fish would be the most important. You could take 1 of those fish and it will probably be to equivalent to 10,000 little fish.
I don't know where that number would be drawn. But yes, one of those fish would absolutely contribute the same as multiple little fish, but there aren't very many of those fish in the population, and that's really where that balance is. And honestly, I don't know that we know where that tipping point, where it's better to have more small fish or
Well,
a few big fish.
I'm just,
Slot limit does protect both.
I'm just using flounder as an example. I mean, to me, flounder is upside down and backwards. I mean, the objective is to protect the spawning fish that are going out and laying eggs. As you set aside 15 inches, which is the exact age, and that the females begin to spawn, and you targeting those fish, removing them before they get a chance to go spawn. Why? The only thing you're taking is female fish. Why would you want to do that? And it's the same thing here. You would only be taking the female fish. Why target the female fish if that's what you want to spawn? It's the logic of it doesn't make sense. In other words, if I wanted a larger fish population, I would say these larger fish are the ones that are going to contribute the most. Then we should leave them alone and let them spawn.
Lucas, related to that question, you have these options in the combination options, right? And all of them most of them include the 14 to 20 inch slot. But all of those that have that slot also include the trophy fish over 26. Assuming that the trophy fish over 26, if you took that off, and just left it at the slot of 14 to 20 for these ones here, how much would those percentages tick up a little bit? Not very much is what I'm guessing, because there's just so few.
I can give you the vague answer, which is not very much, but give me a couple seconds and I can give you I don't want to call it an exact answer. It'll be more precise.
I mean, in every FMT that I've ever sat in, the goal was to have fish in every age group. And now we're doing that backwards, and we're saying, well, the age group and the size of the age of fish doesn't matter anymore.
So, Fred, it's about 0.5%. So it's not much of a difference.
How long should it take a fish to grow from 20 to 26 inches?
It's going to depend on the year. It's going to depend on the food availability, but for spotted sea trout, not as long as it's going to take a lot of other fish, but it could be a while. It could be a while.
How old is a 26-inch fish?
Well, if-
Approximately. Yeah, I know that's.
It's variable, but
But on
it has to be an average.
For spotted sea trout, there probably is an average, but there's so much variation that I don't know that average is meaningful whatsoever.
Give me a second.
I'm just wondering, is it a 5-year-old fish? Is it a 7-year-old? Like,
It could be a
could it ever be a
1-year-old
3-year-old
fish
fish?
in theory.
Probably like from 3 to 20.
I think that would probably be most of them. 3 to.
Average might be like 6 or 7, but I bet the range is pretty huge.
Do they top out at a certain size? I mean, do they quit growing effectively at a certain size?
So there's what we call L infinity, which is like that maximum size, but it's not.
Like we all grow to a certain height.
Yeah, they're not.
They have indeterminate growth,
Exactly.
but it slows
It
down.
slows
also.
way down. After 4 years, it slows way down.
Yeah.
Now, those first 4 years,
They're
it's ridiculous.
right.
And that's what I say it, I'm not actually really joking that it could, it's unlikely it's a 1-year-old fish. But we've certainly seen 1-year-old fish in the low to mid 20s.
Gotcha.
Now we see 1 or 2 of them. It's not as common as a 2, 3, 4-year-old fish, but the ranges, if you look at it in our
Yeah, there's.
FMP update, it's wild. Yeah. So what is that? Like 20?
I mean, just in the 1-year-olds, you're ranging from 5 inches to 28.
Yeah.
I mean,
It's
yeah,
a-
Where did you find them in Fort Fisher outfall or?
We see the same thing in the flounder too,
No,
you know, it's incredible. Most of that starts really early in the first
No.
year. Tremendous variability that starts when they're 5, 6 months old, and then that trajectory just like a big envelope.
we did some,
Whether they get
Yeah.
off tied early or not.
The Bubba's in there, right?
we did some juvenile seining recently in the last couple months. And in our first month of seining, you know, our fish were like 1.5 or like about an inch, I think. By the second month, they're 4 inches. So they've grown 3 inches in a month, basically.
Is
Like, it's wild.
Is the large fish, the trophy fish, is that included in the 3?
Yes.
Yes.
Had another subject. It was, in the original FMP, we're on one, so I'm in the original FMP. It says a very robust release mortality study needed to be conducted, especially for recreational sea trout. And I noticed in the peer review statement on this assessment that, some of the peer reviewers say a deep dive is seriously needed on these release mortalities. My concern there is, like, going through a little explanation, is, you got a segment release mortalities less than 14 inches. Now, in 2008, they estimated the releases, sublegal releases, ranged anywhere from 86 to 96%, with average of about 88%. And 88% of the released fish were sublegal fish, and that's below 12 inches. The mortality on those fish has got to be horrendous. So my point of view, that regulation at 14 inches has created more discards beyond what it was for 12 inches. Now, if it was 88% in 2008, what would that percentage of sublegal fish be now?
So you're asking what the percentage of released fish that are sublegal would be?
Exactly.
I don't know that number off the top of my head. I don't know that we.
So-
does-
So the way MRIP works, which is MRIP is the way we collect recreational harvest statistics or recreational catch statistics. When you interview somebody at a boat ramp, they tell you whether or not they caught a fish and released it or caught a fish and kept it. And if they released it, they tell you why they released it. And there's a disposition code that you write that the interviewer writes down for that. That disposition code is basically it was not legal to keep. But there's nothing in the MRIP survey that actually clarifies whether that is because it is over the bag limit or under the size limit. So a simple look at the number of fish released doesn't actually, you can't actually see whether or not all of those released fish would have been, or all of those released fish that were not legal to harvest were undersized, or maybe they were over the bag limit. Now, you probably could do some additional analysis of that to tease it out, but it's not just that, like, we don't have a code for it basically on the MRIP form.
They were, for some reason, in 2008, all the way back to 1991, they were able to tease it out. Because, I'll give you an example, in 2008, 88% were sublegal fish, 12% were legal fish. So, and the reason is here is because we've been trying to get this mortality study for 16 years now. And it hasn't happened. And my question is, why not? The peer reviewers in this assessment says, we need this study done. What's the mortality rate? what we need to look at is, and what I'm concerned about is the majority of mortality is falling currently under 14-inch fish, on 14-inch fish. Now, these fellows out there catching 20-inch, 28-inch, or whatever fish say, well, I'm gonna release them, they go. I very seriously doubt there's a high mortality there. But there is a mortality that's assigned, which is 10%. Now, with these smaller fish, if you're gonna say the mortality on a 22-inch speckled trout is 10%, which in reality, if you look at the studies, it's a little bit higher than that. If
It
you-
very much depends which study you look at.
Okay, true. But the mortality rate on those sublegal fish, if you apply that same 10% to those sublegal fish, you're way off the mark. You're not gonna convince me that the stresses that are applied to a 22-inch fish, if they're applied to a 10-inch spike, are the same. And that's why this study needs to be done and demonstrated that.
So in the study that we used to come up with our estimated discard mortality, that was a 2020, or I'm not 2020, 2002 study by Jeff Gearhart right here in North Carolina. And I don't believe they found size to be a factor.
Were
Like-
they even looking for size?
Yeah, they absolutely included it as a covariate in their model, and it wasn't significant. What was significant was whether a fish was deep hooked and had hooking injuries, and 90% of those fish died. And what it came out to was that, on average, about 10% of fish fell under that condition. That's why we use that study, because it was in line with other studies from other states. There is a range. You're absolutely right. They're not all saying 10%. But in general, they're like 8 to 12, 8 to maybe 15%. So some of them do come in a little bit higher. Some of them come in a little bit lower. But that one was done right here in North Carolina by the division. And
There was also some salinity issues there also, wasn't there?
no, I think you're conflating that with the I think was it Kevin Brown study that had the slug of low DO water that came down the Neuse. So there was another North Carolina study that we looked at done by Kevin Brown. And I think it was 2008. I want to say maybe it was earlier than that. We did not end up using that study because they had an increased mortality rate, but we were relatively confident that it came from a slug of low oxygen water that came down the river and smacked right into one of the holding pens.
Well, I think the obvious thing here, what you're saying is that's mortality rate up the river. But when the spikes fall out, and they generally show up around the inlets around Thanksgiving, okay, and they're scooped up, and the fellow's sitting there casting into them, trying to catch a 14-inch fish, he's not gonna get a 14-inch fish out of a school of spikes.
Probably not.
Maximum size is 10 to 12 inches. So he's sitting there and he's throwing fish back, it might be 75, 80, 100 fish. That to me is a problem that needs to be addressed. How it's going to be addressed, I have no idea. But as far as these bigger fish and a 10% mortality rate, so, okay, good, well, fine. But the vast majority of the releases that experience mortality are below 14 inches.
Yep. And again, the Gearhart study shows that there's not really a difference in the mortality rate between those fish.
As a fisherman that's been on the water for 50 years, I'm gonna tell you that the stresses on a 22 or 24-inch fish, if you apply those same stresses to a 10 or 12-inch spike, you're gonna see a spike in mortality. How to demonstrate that, how you come out with the data, I don't know. somebody needs to design the study and it needs to be conducted. It's been- Like I said, been asking for 15, 16 years now.
If I remember from some of those studies, that water temperature had a huge part to do with it as well. That when it was colder, they seemed to do better. I remember that from way back.
I know a lot of studies do show that.
Yeah.
I don't recall I don't think that the Gearhart study did find water temperature to be a significant factor. Now, I do think in the Gillnet release mortality study, they absolutely found water temperature was a significant factor.
I was on
I
the
think
Sea
in
Grant
the-
FRG for years, and we looked at all these.
For sure.
Year after year after year. And I remember that there was a study
Yeah.
of some type.
And there, I've definitely seen that
It could have been
in other
the
studies.
Gillnet study.
Yeah. And in the Gillnet study, they definitely found water temperature.
And I would
was
assume a Gillnet
Yep.
study and a hook and line may have some correlation. You can't say it does
Yeah.
exactly, but the likelihood of having, let's say, cooler water, which a lot of this fishing is October, November, is different than a June or July fish.
It's certainly not going to hurt.
Yeah.
It's certainly not going to hurt. You have more oxygen in the water. You have cooler water temperatures. There's less stress. It's definitely, I mean, I don't think Jeff's study found water temperature as a significant
They didn't
factor,
study more either.
but it's certainly not going to hurt.
Maybe that's something she wanted to just add real quick.
Yeah, so Tom, to your point, yes, it was temperature varied for some species. not
Yes.
Sea trout. So striped bass, you. mentioned
Yes.
Yeah,
that
maybe it
warm,
was.
Yeah.
hot and cold did impact
Yeah,
striped
that's
bass.
big.
Back to-
There's-
Yeah.
We ran through many of those studies. They ran together.
Yeah, I agree.
I hear
get
that.
confused. So back to Ken's point, and I think that's a good point you're bringing forward, Mr. Sapler. And to note too, that is a research need that we
Yeah.
have in the plan. It's bullet number 3, and these aren't on priority, but these are considered some of the higher priorities, is to develop information on size of recreational releases and improve those estimates of recreational carbon mortality. So I just wanted to highlight that.
Not to underdo you, it was a high priority in 2009 too. wasn't it?
Maybe not high enough.
I will say that, in a lot of ways underscores the difficulty of getting at that information because we don't see those. We see a portion of what folks bring back because our MRIP intercepts see those. We have a carcass collection program where we see some of those carcasses, but we don't see those discards. Because if you're out fishing, and I know you're not going to hammer those spikes because you know better, but if you're out fishing, we don't see the fish that you release. So it's hard to get at, what's,
Well, I don't catch fish that I have to.
well, that's fair. That's fair. When I'm out fishing, I'm the only one who sees the fish that I'm throwing.
I'm not fishing on.
Yeah, no, I got
Like population.
I got you,
That's not gonna pay the light bill.
right? But I do think it kind of underscores the difficulty.
Yeah, just, I don't know if this is more of a comment or than just general. I mean, we've got one of the goals in here is to promote the outreach and just jurisdictional cooperation. I didn't see anything in here that was promoting outreach to, we were talking about this mortality and other, ways of using different hooks, and all this, but I don't see anything in here that talks about outreach. I didn't see, I searched through the FMP Amendment 1, and I don't see anything in there that talks about promoting some of these things and making sure that that's some of the stuff about don't, sit on spikes, don't catch up, all of those sorts of things, which would potentially reduce mortality or at least help make these things better. I don't see any of that in here, so I don't know if that's.
Education.
Yeah.
So a lot of that, and I would say most of that outreach and education happens through our ethical angling. Amanda Masick, handles a lot of that through, she'll go talk to, staff will go to boat shows schools,
Shouldn't
fishing
that be in here?
clubs.
But shouldn't that be in an FMP when we talk about that's one of our goals? Shouldn't that be in here to say
Education.
specifically, we're going to talk about these
Yeah.
things and.
Like as
work
they
with-
relate to spotted
As they
sea trout.
relate to
Yeah.
spotted sea trout, these are the things we should be talking about in outreach. I know it's not a management option because there's issues with how you quantify that and all that, but shouldn't that be in here that we're going to work with? I forget you already said the name.
The ethical angling program.
We're gonna work with this. These are the things that we're gonna promote for spotted sea trout. And
Yeah.
they should be in here and highlighted that these are the things we should be talking about.
Yeah.
That's the whole reason, that's the whole reason the Division of Marine Fisheries is established, for the purpose of education, and somehow we wandered over to the courtroom.
So just to clarify a
Educate
question, I was just gonna ask about the slot limit and how, given that it's really prevalent within the combination management measures, but within the speckled trout, advisory committee, as they were working with the division to sort of develop the amendment and come up with some of these measures, was there a lot of support for that approach within the recreational sector? I mean, like you said, the recreational sector is the dominant player. They remove 85%, 85% of the harvest. And so was there a lot of discussion within that sector about this 15 to 20 inch size?
Yeah, absolutely. There has been a lot of recreational support from our very first public scoping meeting. And we had some very well attended public scoping meetings, very well attended. It was awesome, quite frankly. I think in New Bern, we had over 100 people show up, which was just phenomenal. But there was a lot of support from that stage through the advisory committee workshop. When we hear public comment at commission meetings, we do hear a lot of recreational support for a slot limit. Now, that's not to say that every single person we've certainly heard some dissent as well. But I would say the support pretty overwhelmingly, from what we've heard at least, outweighs the dissent.
Okay. And I'm just looking at the difference between, so I'm looking at in this table, I don't know if you guys have this table in front of you.
Yeah.
So option 5E, right, which is this December 16 to
Mhm.
February closure, right? And a reduction from 4 to 3 fish in the bag,
Yep.
but no change in the size, right? And that gets you to a 30% recreational reduction, right? Just going from 4 to 3 and then that closure in that window, right? And then if you go down to 5J, right, it's the same closure, the one just below the recommended one. Same closure, same bag limit, but that one has the slot and it goes up to 43%. So am I understanding correctly that the difference then between the 30% recreational reduction and the 43% is primarily due to the slot,
I think there was 2 weeks difference.
right?
It depends. Are you looking at 5I?
Yeah.
No, I'm looking at 5E versus 5J. So E has the December 16 to February closure, right? December 16. It's the only one that has everything the same except doesn't have the slot versus one that does have the slot. I'm just trying to understand the impacts of the slot overall as opposed to just leaving the minimum at 14.
Yes, the only reason I'm confused is because at the table I'm looking at, 5J is a total December to February closure.
Okay.
Which I might be looking at the wrong table.
This
Okay,
I'll find the,
2.8
In the discussion.
in the
document.
decision
all good.
document.
we're getting there.
I'm just trying to so the difference between those is like 13% production, so I'm just assuming that 13% is because you can't catch fish over 20.
Gotcha,
And then you
okay.
can only
Yes.
catch one over 26.
Yes,
So it sort of has some magnitude in terms of its impacts.
it does.
And then the 1 over 26, you've already clarified that it's pretty insignificant.
Yeah.
Whether that's there or not.
And that's why we drew that trophy at 26.
Which is, years and years ago, I chaired the Red Drum Advisory Committee, when the first FMP, or not, an amendment was done, maybe in, I don't know, 2005, somewhere in that neighborhood. And there was some discussion, was that 08? Was it 08? Might have been, but it was a long time ago. And so, but there was some discussion about trophy fishery, because Texas has a trophy. Their slot is different than ours. It's 20 to 28, and you can keep one fish, but only one a year over that, right? They issue tags. But in the case of Red Drum here, at that time, it would have meant we would have had to cut an inch off the top of the set from 18 to 26 instead of going to 27 to achieve just doing one trophy fish a year. And there just wasn't any appetite for that in either sector at that time. So it was meaningful in that it would have required a lot more sacrifice to have that trophy fishery. And it was only one fish a year. Here you can keep one on trip.
Yeah.
Over 26, and it still doesn't really have much impact.
I think there you're looking at the difference of a fish that lives 50 years and a fish that is 10 would be fantastic to see.
Right. We just don't see,
Exactly.
just not that many fish over 26.
Exactly.
People are counting. I think they like the idea that if they did get one over 26, they could keep it.
And what we heard a lot about the trophy limit was basically people didn't want to lock in the state record.
Right.
They wanted an opportunity to set a new state record, or if you really catch that true fish of a lifetime, they wanted the opportunity to take that home. And then from our perspective, it was a balance of that and actually locking in somewhat of a reduction from the slot limit.
Yeah, I mean, so most of the protection is coming from, fish from 20 to 25 being off limits.
It's honestly, it's,
Fish 14 to 20.
yeah. It's about 20 to 24-ish is where the bulk of that comes from. And then that 24 to 25, you get a little bit extra.
The bag limit gets you more escapement to
Yep.
get to 20, and then you're protected from 20 to 24,
Yep.
which has a lot of spawning production.
Makes sense to me.
Other questions for these guys about sort of the measures that are in here or presentation?
Looking to hear what you were just discussing, that January, February closure. How is that going to mesh with wildlife?
So from what I understand, wildlife, as long as they have enough lead time to make changes, are able to make temporary rules. Now, whether they, I can't,
They don't,
yeah, for inland waters,
they
yeah.
don't appear to be too cooperative at this point in time, so.
Now, I'm gonna punt the answer to that one. No.
They're getting better, I think, right? Right direct calls, they're getting
I
better.
think we would be looking at a very different situation with spotted sea trout.
Well, I mean, the whole, I can't for the life of me remember what year it was. You couldn't, at one point in time, you couldn't take non-game fish in inland waters. And so you couldn't take trout. And then they changed it in inland waters and made it a game fish, so you could take it. So I think you're gonna run into a heck of a twist there. January, February.
Cape Fear is going to be that's an interesting point, because there's a lot of people that striper fish during that January, February, so there might be a lot of trout all recreationally there. I don't know, I'm guessing, but it was a big recreation. I know it's all catch and release, but
That's mostly gonna be in joint.
and that whole downtown area is
No, that's inland water.
Well, not where people are doing most of the
Brunswick
striping.
River's all,
That's
the
joint.
river's all joint. And there's a lot of people striper fishing in there.
Joint or coastal?
Brunswick's joint. I looked it up not too far ago.
It's joint. But inland doesn't start until you're above Lock and
Above
Dam
the-
1, right?
Right at one.
Right at it.
In New River, you got access to all of them.
Well, yeah, New River's would be interesting because places like Frenchie's Creek and Duck Creek inland waters start right at the mouth. Right, and so, and that's where people winter fish for trout is they go up in those creeks, and those would be in.
I mean, there's definitely gonna have to be some conversation.
Yes, Okay.
hopefully productive ones. I have faith that they will be productive ones.
Got a question.
Yes.
So the speckled trout stock assessment have been shaky, I'll put it that way, for a while. So like in 2009, they had claimed that it was being overfished for 18 years. We get to 2014 and there's another assessment that says it's not overfished and it has never occurred. And then you move on through time, even though it was no overfishing, some rules were passed. And they didn't go away after it was ascertained that there was not overfishing, as they claimed that it was when these rules were passed. So fast forward to now, today's world. How confident are you in this assessment, and how confident are your peers in the assessment? Because when you got to the screen that is attempting to project out to 2035, you must have some degree of confidence to project out that far in the materials you're working with today. How confident are you?
So I think I would like to start answering your question by addressing some of those previous stock assessments and the reason that the stock assessment model changed over that time. So that 2000, I think it was 2009, I want to say, maybe it was 2008, that original stock assessment that kicked off the original spotted sea trout FMP. It was not picking up the signature of increased winter mortality. Spotted sea trout, this might or might not be news to anyone sitting in this room, but they're highly susceptible to these cold stuns. So temperatures get real cold in the winter. If you stay too cold for too long, you have mass mortality for spotted sea trout. The 2008 or 9 stock assessment appeared to be assigning some of that winter mortality to fishing mortality. So basically, we felt it was overestimating fishing mortality. That's actually the whole reason that Supplement A went into place to put the brakes on the original FMP. Was actually supposed to have much more restrictive management than what's currently in place go in. It was like a 2-fish bag limit. I think there was a slot that was going to go into place and some other maybe season closures. I'd have to go back and reread it. Amendment 1 or Supplement A put a stop on that until we could update the stock assessment. So that's that next stock assessment that you're talking about. That while we felt it did a better job, it still wasn't picking up that winter mortality signature. Fast forward to the current stock assessment, and we do feel we feel it is picking up that winter mortality signature. We see increases, so it gets real complicated real fast, but winter mortality was allowed to vary in this current stock assessment. And we see it increase years that we've had cold stuns. We see higher mortality in the winter, which is good. Like, we want the model to pick up that signature. So I definitely feel, I feel pretty darn confident that this is the most current stock assessment model is a better one than the previous.
And you feel confident that it can project out. And if it is incorrect, a break can be applied.
So projections are always going to have some assumptions that go into them, which we mentioned straight off the bat. No, we assume there's no cold stuns. We assume recruitment is the same. I'm confident that if all of those conditions happen exactly like that, that we've got probably a pretty decent projection of what the stock's going to look like. But those conditions, let's be honest, those conditions aren't going to happen exactly like that. Recruitment is, some years it's great, some years it's terrible, some years it's right in the middle. And we're going to have a cold stun eventually.
And
I hope not
we're
for a
gonna
long
have
time,
some
but eventually.
hurricanes too.
Right? Exactly. Exactly.
Throw that in there.
Um,
And, well, I'm sorry.
So yeah, no, I was just gonna say, under the conditions that we're assuming, I'm confident that it gives a decent picture. Now, is it to the, exact, precise percent? I mean, there's gonna be wiggle room, but I'm confident it gives a pretty good snapshot.
Okay. And the other thing is, I mean, you've got weather events, as you stated, which probably have as much or more to do with things and than anything, if there's a drastic change. But, I'm just curious about the commercial end of things, because that's what I'm concerned with. But I'm just curious about why any more restrictions on the commercial side are needed when all the take and all the, mortality rate, whatever, is on the other side. And in addition to that, when you're talking about the gill nets and letting, I mean, it lets the little ones through and it gills the ones it's supposed to. But, with gill nets, you're not getting them one at a time, or hopefully not one at a time, so if things were tweaked to where, and you've done that where you can only set them a certain amount of time, then I'm not sure why anything else is needed.
So one thing that we have seen in both sectors of this fishery, starting in 2019, is a pretty hefty increase in landings. Now, that increase in the recreational sector, it's like we said, straight from the bat, off the bat, is a recreationally dominated fishery. Now, I wouldn't say that all of the removals come from the recreational fishery, because about 14% of them do come from the commercial fishery.
Right.
But you're right.
So that's
It's a
14%.
It's a much smaller percentage.
Yeah,
Um,
that's not a lot.
but we saw landings in the commercial fishery, if you look from 2019 to 22, compared to that 2012 to 2018 time, landings in the commercial fishery increased about 134%.
I know,
It
but
is
that's
a-
still very much though.
When you got one group catching 80% of the fish and another group taking 20%, is that really a problem?
And our preliminary management recommendations are implementing management on both sectors of the fishery that come out to be equitable to those percentages that each sector harvests. That was that last, or one of those last graphs that Melinda put up there.
Well,
The percentage,
I can appreciate that when you're taking 220,000 pounds, you're taking half the man's paycheck. Do you want to offer up half of your paycheck?
I understand that.
I'll say this, if the shoe was on the other foot, and this was a 80% commercial, 20% recreational.
Then the
And you-
recreation,
and
the
then you
recreational
didn't-
say, oh, we want a quota, we want a quota.
And if you didn't reduce the recreational proportional to the commercial, you'd be killing head off.
Well, that's exactly what just happened in Flounder. I mean, exactly what, and
I mean, the recreational, you can't do much anything with flounder recreational.
my point exactly. My point exactly. So it's tit for tat. You're going down the same road. Where you're going to end up is, well, you got one red drum, one flounder. Right now, it's possibly three speckled trout. And in the next iteration, you're probably looking, oh, well, now you got one speckled trout. I don't want nothing to do with that scenario myself. I want you to catch fish and I want to catch fish. How can we best get out of it? But sitting here trying to beat you over the head or not you personally.
No, but I mean, you could take the same point that a guy representing the recreational says, you know what, we're catching fish, we want to keep catching fish, screw the commercial guy. I mean, it works both ways.
It works
It works both
But
ways.
let-
And the commercial guy wants it all to be born on the recreational side.
That's not true.
It can't.
Do not say that.
It's
That
gotta
is
be
not true.
equitable, and that's what they're trying to propose.
That is
Is
absolutely
the
not true.
huge poundage reductions coming out of recreational by what they propose. Huge poundage reduction, not out of the commercial. Commercial's a small report. They take a lot smaller cut of the poundage, but percentage wise, it's effectively the same. Now, I don't know how else you split a baby, if you know what I'm saying, because we're down to split the baby because we're going down by X%.
If I could finish my point, I didn't make me, okay. Our little bit is actually a greater harvest reduction than this. That's one thing. But the other thing was talking about setting the gill nets. You know, it just seems like you be having more discard mortality. When if you could tweak something a little different and be able to keep more of these fish because they are selected out and generally are in the right range to keep. Does that make sense?
I'd
But they have
say,
a hard time with the gill net saying that this fish evidently is not very selective with the gill net size changing.
The gill nets are letting the small, he's just said, letting the small fish go.
And to a certain
So
degree.
we need to not have as many regulatory discards.
it depends on, the answer to that depends on whether you are talking selecting for legal sized fish or selecting by size across a broader size range. If we're saying, are gill nets effective at selecting for legal size fish? From what we see both in the commercial fishery and in our own independent gill net sampling, that answer is yes. We actually struggle to catch undersized fish when we want to catch them for research purposes. When that answer is, we want to implement a slot limit on the commercial fishery, it gets a little more complicated and they don't appear to. be
Because the
nearly
bigger
as-
get
yeah.
caught, and that's the problem. A slot limit will not work on the commercial side of it. It's very difficult.
It would require a
lot of
very, very, very small range of allowable mesh sizes
Yeah.
to make it work.
But
Pam, what are you asking for again?
I don't think you need a slot limit on commercial fish. I
Yeah,
think
it's
you
not-
need
it's
a
not-
minimum size, not a slot.
Can you clarify what you were asking for though about what were you just asking about related?
I was just saying that
Cards,
about regulatory discards and trying to avoid them.
right?
And that currently the commercial sector takes 15 or less %.
Right.
Which was 200-something thousand pounds, which is nothing for fish. 200,000 pounds is nothing. And when you take 40% away from nothing, you're left with even less than nothing. That's what I was getting at. And that's what I was asking, and
Well, it's not-
I get what you're saying, Tom.
But it's not 40%.
I do.
But the 40% is the overall, most of the.
But one
percent.
was 39 and one was 40.
No, but the commercial reduction's still only
It's
14.
Yeah.
She is right.
The commercial-
It's 200,000 pounds though.
Right.
Yes,
But it's
exactly.
14% though.
Of the total reduction.
Right.
So
Yeah.
if, look, commercial harvest under the preliminary recommendations would be decreased by 40%.
Yeah.
Basically, both sides are
And,
decreased
and
by right
I
around
was
40.
saying 40% of nothing leaves you less than nothing.
Like
I mean, that's what I was, and Tom is exactly right.
Well, it's not,
Because-
but it's not
but
nothing.
I-
It still represents 15% of the
Have to-
harvest. It's not nothing. 15% is still
That's-
6.
I mean, but that's, in terms of somebody making money off fishing and supporting their family, that is less than nothing. You just as soon not even go out there. It is less than nothing.
Well, that's what.
But what, if we managed correctly, we would do the right thing for both sides. And I don't think we've ever done that. I think we feel like, well, this side says you're doing something to me, so I've got to do something to you.
Exactly.
I don't think it should be like that.
No, it shouldn't.
I don't.
Go ahead, Jesse. Hold on one second.
I think-
Would Jesse interject for a second?
So-
Because
so-
we need to move forward and make some recommendations.
And I think what I'm saying maybe can move us forward a little bit. I think sometimes we focus in on what the actual harvest reduction percentages that we have up on the screen and that we talk about what those percentages actually are. And sometimes I think we do a disservice by doing that because we know that those percentages are statistical percentages that we've come up with. And we won't actually, at least in theory, all the time, we won't actually get those percentages. What a better way to look at it is the management options that are on the table. Which one of those management options are more preferable than other ones? Which one would you like to see than another one? Not necessarily. Now, I understand you do have to also look at how much of a reduction that would ultimately give you, but I think sometimes the focus on that actual percentage number might be a little misguided and not actually looking at the totality of the options and what the management that would be in place would be. And I think we've seen that with the recreational community for our preliminary management recommendations is a lot of people, when they hear for the first time a 40% reduction, like that like blows your mind. That sounds like a lot. And it is a lot. But when you actually talk to someone first about what those reductions, what the management options would be, rather than the percentage, they're more open to it. They sound worse when you look at the actual percentage reduction than they would have had you not looked at the percentage reduction first. Now, 40% is always going to sound bad. Like that's, I mean, Ken, like you said, that's a lot. But focusing on what the actual options available to reduced harvest are, I think really is the most productive way to look at it. And then look at the percentages that would get you.
I've looked at it, and I look at it from a flounder's perspective. You had 70% of the flounder. You had recreational catching 30%. Okay, but there was nothing in the world. There was nothing in the world stopping you from catching 70% of the flounder. But I was catching. But there was nothing stopping you from catching as many fish as I do. But there seems to be some angst there that because I'm catching fish that you should have, and that's where the whole thing just gets twisted up and everybody gets mad. If you had left it alone without an allocation and say, well, I'm gonna go fishing and I'm gonna catch every damn fish I can catch. Nobody would have said anything. It would have been nothing. Instead, you got an allocation that locks you into how many you can catch, what size he is, and you can catch. Now you're at one fish, and that's the same road you're headed down right here. Same exact road. I watched you with Red Drum from 2005, 2008, all the way through. Every meeting I went to, every meeting. The only meetings I missed was Northern meeting. And I watched the same thing and the same process go on and on and on. And you're put into a dogfight that nobody's going to win.
One thing you do have to deal with, and they have to deal with when this is all done, is public perception. Be it on the commercial side or the recreational side, if somebody thinks they're getting screwed because somebody else doesn't have to do this or doesn't have to do this, that's just a fact.
Exactly.
There is a public perception out there, and if it doesn't appear to be equitable, somebody's gonna have a problem.
Exactly. And most of the time, those people that
And we
are
may
voting
disagree
out
on what's
the
equitable.
problem, they don't even know what's going on.
Yeah. And we may disagree on what's equitable.
They don't even know what's happening.
So can we move forward with thinking about some recommendations,
Yeah,
just
we gotta
even the equitability issue?
I got one.
That's where we are.
I got one more issue I want to bring up. In 2013, I tried to find a motion from the Fin Fish Committee But it was, and the explanation was, they limited the boat to 75 fish, even if you had 2 licenses on there. Fish committee listened to the explanation. It reduced amount of gear in the water. It made it safer for fishermen to work. It was more economical. So in other words, I could take my boat out and go catch 75 fish. And my buddy could get in his boat, go out there and anchor it up. When we got done catching my 75 fish, we'd get in his boat and go catch 75 fish. And it's perfectly legal. Not a thing in the world with it. He had 2 creel limits in 2 different boats. And what we were trying to do was eliminate one boat just eliminate one boat and 1 complement of gear. In other words, we're taking gear out of the water by letting 2 men go on 1 boat and catch the same amount of fish that they're allotted. And that motion passed by the Finfish was 9-0, unanimous. Then it went to the commission, and at the May meeting 2014, the commission approved it 9-0 to become up in the next FMP. Well, here we are in the FMP. And I think it was supposed to have been addressed in the FMP, and I didn't see anything in there about it. So I'd like to add that to the list.
Say again the year for the commission for me,
2014.
2014?
2014, May meeting 2014. I got the motion right here. It says spotted sea trout, motion to adapt Finfish Advisory Committee's recommendation regarding additional spotted sea trout limits in commercial fishing operation. Motion, Mikey Daniels, seconded Joe Smith. Motion carries 9-0. And it was to go into this FMP, not in there.
I would have to dig back and look at those conversations and look at the conversations with the original FMP. That's not something.
This wasn't in the
Familiar with
FMP. This came out of the Finfish Committee.
You're talking about
Well-
2014 when, that speckled trout stuff passed?
Yeah.
And it was 75 fish?
Yeah. Just
So it's,
after that,
so after that, in 2014, a 25 fish commercial trip limit was implemented. And then in 2014, DMF conducted a new speckled trout stock assessment, which showed overfishing was not occurring and stock was not overfished. And apparently never had been, not even for the previous 18 years from the old stock assessment. And so in anticipation, and I remember this happened, of the new stock assessment results, the commission approved supplement A to the speckled trout FMP, which prevented the full impact of statutes being realized and implemented the current management measures.
Yeah,
There you go.
that's what I'm saying.
That's
That's
what
what,
happened.
that's what stopped the more restrictive management
Right.
from
That's
going
what
into
you-
place. 'Cause
Well,
amendment
The
or
25 fish did not fly. The 75 fish is still supposed to be 75 fish.
right now.
it is.
Yeah, so, I mean, but they wanted to reduce it to 25 fish, but because of those reasons, that did not stick. And there was a new stock assessment that showed overfishing had never occurred.
It showed they had some common sense and made a reasonable decision. I understand.
There you go. Exactly, my point. So that's what happened back then.
Well, I'd like to make a motion to adopt that, and I'll tell you what the, Finfish Committee, Advisory Committee said, because I was on that Finfish Advisory Committee. And it was 9-1-0, or 9-0, unanimous approval. And it was to approve and allow 2 licenses on 1 boat to have 2 limits of fish.
Coming out of the Finfish Advisory Committee.
Right.
Yep.
Okay.
All right.
In Fish Advisory Committee, I want to
That I
say,
understand.
I want to say 2013. Guessing, I looked back and tried to pull up the logs on the GMF site, but as far as they go back, 2015, and everything else is archived, so. But anyway, it was never addressed, it was approved by the commission. And what the advisory committee motion was to allow 2 licenses, 1 boat to have 2 bag limits of fish with 1 complement of gear. And that was, that took gear out of the water. Because you only have 1 complement of gear. You can't fish 2 people on 1 boat with 2 complements of gear. I could say, well, it's 4,000 yards. No, it cut it back, say, no, 2,000, that's your max.
So we need to take public comment, and I think we only have Glenn Skinner who's got public comment. So Glenn, if you want to address the committee.
Yeah, I've got a ton of questions. Fred, I was wondering if you would allow me to get some clarification on the graph they had up there earlier, because
Which one?
the one that showed the percentage of keeping the SSB above the target. I haven't seen this one quite like this before, and I just want to make sure I understand it.
That's what it does in just a second.
No, I was trying to jump the gun. I'm not gonna mess you up.
So the
My
lines,
apologies.
you know, the red line and the dash line represent those probabilities of keeping the biomass where they want to keep it, right?
But this is a 50% probability
Correct.
of keeping SSB above the target.
Above the target.
Not
Not the-
overfishing in 2 years.
Yes, that's a very good clarification.
So the blue line, that is the current rate of fishing.
Correct.
And if we go out at the current rate of fishing till 2035, which I understand this is saying with no cold stuns, that means that stock will still not be overfished. It'll be above the threshold. Because they don't have the threshold on here, so I'm trying to figure, it looks like if we keep fishing at this rate for the next 11 years, the stock will not be overfished, and I see that it plateaus and levels out. And I'm wondering how far out we can go at this rate without triggering fish status on stock, because the threshold's not on there, and it's just.
So you're right. This particular graph has nothing to do with the threshold, because it's showing probability above the target. So it's not, we do have graphs that show probability above the threshold. You know,
If 20% would be at the 20% across there, and you don't.
no. So the y-axis or the left axis here is just it's a probability. It's a probability of staying above the target SSB level. So the 20% you're thinking is that F 20% or the SSB 20%, which is the threshold. But there's nothing with the threshold on this particular graph.
So how far out, if we kept projecting out, would it be before the stock was actually overfished?
We would have to rerun those projections under under the assumptions of and this is where when I was answering Pam's question, I was saying it very, very much depends on the assumptions used in the projection staying true.
Well, just to
It's
clarify,
not like-
right, you know, projections, right? When you look at projections and probabilities going forward, those projections are generally when you have an overfished stock and you're trying to
Yeah.
rebuild. You can't use them in the other direction. In other words, that the statute says we're overfishing, we got to end overfishing within 2 years.
Yeah.
Right? So we have to end overfishing, which is the purple line, right? Which is basically saying if we do the purple line, which is basically a 19.9% reduction, it gets us in a pretty good place of keeping the biomass where it is now, which is the division is indicated from all the public scoping. People are really happy with the biomass now. So the thought is if you were at least at the purple line, you'd have about a 70%, 75% chance that you'd keep the biomass there. If you go a little bit higher than the purple line, right, like 30 or 40%, we have a much higher probability of keeping the biomass where it is, which is keeping people happy. And so,
I get that, but under statute, we're not required to keep people happy. We're required to
but we have to end overfishing,
end over, well,
right? Which
I'll
is,
I'll get
which
to
is
that
the
in my
purple line.
comments, but that's what I'm trying to say. This kind of, if you're not paying attention, this looks like the 50% probability under statute of
Right.
ending overfishing, but that's not what. this-
No, that's not what this-
I want clarification
No,
there,
that's a-
and-
nope.
And then I'll just get into 50%
The-
probability.
So the 50% probability doesn't actually even come into this whatsoever because we're not trying to rebuild the stock. In this, it's that end overfishing. We had that 2 years from implementation of the plan, that management has to end overfishing. That's the purple line, is the
And-
bare minimum that we
The
have.
purpose of the projection past 2026.
What do you mean?
In other words, it's,
He's saying you got 2 years to end overfishing. Why'd you project out past 2 years?
Because we want to look long-term at what the stock's doing, because again, the purpose of focusing on this graph wasn't saying, you know, oh, we need to rebuild the stock, oh, we have a 50% probability of success necessarily. It's to show our probability of keeping spawning stock biomass above the target, which again is where it currently is. And what we've heard loud and clear from every sector throughout this process is there's a lot of fish available and people really like the fact that there's a lot of fish available. So that's why we chose to show this graph focusing on keeping SSB above the target, because that's the situation that has led to the fishery that people are really happy with.
I think projections are fine. Just take a black sheet of paper and cover up from 2026 to 2035. People could understand it a lot better.
Yeah, it's just showing,
I understand what you're showing is a projection, but we're here to
again,
address the
you
issue,
know, the
not a
commission
projection.
has statutory, you know, requirements that they have to meet. It doesn't mean that their preferred management measures can't go beyond those. They certainly
They're
can.
minimum.
You have another clarifier, you have comments?
I've got a ton of questions, but I ain't gonna hold you all night, so I'm just gonna offer my comments. And,
We appreciate that.
yeah, just so everybody knows, I'm Glenn Skinner, Executive Director of North Carolina Fisheries Association. And Pam touched on some of my concerns, uncertainty in these stock assessments. And I know you all have a lot of faith, or more faith in this stock assessment, but it's real hard for us, the industry, to get past stock assessments that change so drastically. You know, the first stock assessment estimated SSB in 2008 at 800,000 pounds. You did the second stock assessment and SSB in 2008 went to 3.3 million pounds. You did this one and it's 4 million pounds. The first one, 18 years of overfishing is occurring. The next one, those 18 years wasn't overfished and overfishing was not occurring. Now this one, even though spawning stock biomass is much higher, if you look back at those 18 years, overfishing is occurring again and it was overfishing. There's something going on here, and I know y'all are trying to find a model that fits this. It says in your FMP and your assessments that speckled trout are very hard to assess. But when you're talking about these kind of reductions and this kind of uncertainty, and I haven't even mentioned the uncertainty in the recreational data, which is probably going to change again in the very near future, there is reason for us to doubt projections, the estimates of SSB, the estimates of F in comparison to the threshold and the target, because they have changed drastically, not slightly, drastically each time. We saw updates with blue crab and southern flounder raise concerns when we add new data to it. We saw striped mullet, stock assessment running drastically from the previous two. Have to get certainty in these stock assessments, and we cannot take harsh reductions with that high degree of uncertainty. You can't come back to somebody and tell them, oops, when you put them out of work. Pam and them were trying to make a very good point earlier. Commercial harvest relies, or access relies solely on harvest. Recreational access does rely solely on harvest. You can't have a recreational fishery that's catching. You can't commercial. That's why we feel like it impacts us more when you only manage harvest and you do not manage discard mortality in that recreational fishery, as the peer reviewer said you should. So I've got huge concerns
with the uncertainty in this stock assessment, and we can't support management that doesn't address other sources of mortality outside of harvest because we feel like it's going to fail. We've looked at every one of these plans, and every time you do this, one thing holds true. Recreational dead discards continue to increase. You can't keep coming back and saying, well, we'll reduce harvest again. I don't understand how we can say that the way to achieve sustainable harvest is to trade harvest for dead discards. You can't keep reducing it and just increasing dead discards. It's not going to work. So that are some of my major concerns. And if Fred will ask, I've got one final question. I want to understand if you all have been updated on the changes that may be coming on FES and how a 30 to 40% decrease in recreational harvest and dead discards could impact these projections and whether this stock is supposedly overfished. And I question overfished because overfishing is a trend. It's not a single year. Overfishing slightly over a threshold in 1 year is not overfishing, it's a stock. It's not jeopardizing the stock. It's not jeopardizing sustainable harvest. It's a blip. Until you get several years of overfishing in a row in a trend, I can't understand how you're overfishing a stock in a single year. It's impossible unless we caught the last one that year. So, got real strong concerns about all of that, and I would love to know what y'all think will happen with this FES recalibration and whether it will change all of this dramatically like we saw in the past. Leave it at that.
Okay. Do you guys want to address the FES question, or do you want, I can tell you what we're doing at the federal level with the FES question.
I mean, I'd love to hear it.
Which we mostly ignore for the most part, you know. But for those of you that aren't aware, the FES was, you know, it's mostly in the effort survey, which is the mail survey. And what they discovered was that the ordering in which they asked the questions in that mail-in survey may have caused some bias. The problem is that they the problem that we had as an SSC for the South Atlantic Council was because they automatically kind of assumed the bias was in one direction, both in terms of what they call telescoping error, right? And recall error or recall bias. So you're asking people what they caught a month ago, 2 months ago, and it turned out that the way they asked the questions could affect the answers in terms of whether they asked one first or another. But it's still just as likely that the bias could be the opposite direction, right? And there's no way that they'll know that. I think the messaging got sent out and it's making people assume that the bias was in the direction where because everyone knows when they went to the new effort survey, it pushed the recreational effort really high in terms of the RIP estimates. And now this change may bring it down again a little bit, at least 30 or 40% potentially. And I think that messaging got out there a little prematurely, and it could actually be that the bias could be in both directions. They're assuming that the telescoping error is the issue and not the recall. But so until they finish their follow-up study, which is really comprehensive, we're just being told that we have to use the numbers that we have now, because there's no way to know if that bias is one way or another. So that's the issue. And again, related to the stock assessments, Glenn, I understand where you're coming from. I mean, we do see it a lot where you see, some of these reference points kind of shift over time, but I think that Lucas explained it really well initially was the information that they had on the cold stuns initially was really incomplete. And then it was a comprehensive study that Tim Ellis did up at NC State and Jeff Buckles' group and did this statewide study using electronic and conventional tagging to really nail down sort of the quantitative impact of that cold stun. And then when they redid the first assessment, that information is not as easy to integrate into the age structured assessment as it seems like it would be. Whereas this assessment now does a much better job. The models keep advancing in terms of the ability to use that kind of data, which is really powerful data, right? Independent estimates of harvest rate from a tagging program or other things that used to always have to be interpreted separately. Now can be integrated But then it changes things, right? And so, but, I know it's hard, and you see it, it's frustrating to me too when I see it.
And we get that, but it's real tough when each stock assessment is peer reviewed, approved for you. And then they come back and it changes drastically. And then you take this stock assessment, which is literally a flip above the threshold. And that, it doesn't take much uncertainty.
Right.
That overfishing would not be occurring at all because it's only that one single year. And a 40 to 50% harvest reduction is huge when just a slight degree of uncertainty below that line we wouldn't be here talking about it. And that's where frustration is going to come in and concern over whether your explanation of overfishing meets overfishing definitions that I've read countless numbers of, a trend of overfishing instead of one blip around there and, oh my God, we're overfishing. We need multiple years, because if it went down to 2 years after that, or if recruitment went up, or if SSB went up, that was just that one little blip of overfishing. Now, if it didn't, we updated the stock assessment and it kept in that trend, yeah, but it's just concerning, to say the least, for us. And
I
I'll
think-
leave it at that.
I think this uses though, it does use a 3-year average of the F at the end of the time series. So the impact of that last year is downweighted a bit. In other words, if they just use the terminal graph, then the reductions would have to be even more to bring that F down. But the Fs have been hovering right around that line for a while, and then they just ticked up at the end.
And I looked at that too, but still that uncertainty is just hard to not see that just swaying down below it and everything being hunky-dory, or could sway slightly above it. The fact is, none of us really believe we know what's going on with these stocks when we look at all these. And as Pam said in the last meeting, we're comparing apples to oranges and oranges to grapefruits and grapefruit to pineapple. I can't look at any stock assessment we have from one iteration to the other and tell whether we've achieved everything with recreational data change, model changes, inputs. It could be a biological year one time, calendar year another time. And I know you're trying to make them better, but it is impossible for somebody to look at it and tell whether we've achieved a damn thing or what the stock was at one time or what the harvest was at another time. It's all just a big blurry blob for me. And I'm not educated, but I'm not stupid. It's really confusing to look at this and try to figure out what we've achieved, if anything. So, but I'm not a committee member, so I'm gonna shut up.
I'm educated and stupid. Pam's told me that several times.
Well, I ain't gonna comment about that, Fred.
As long as you're not a knucklehead, you be all right.
So should we, you want to get a motion on the
I'm
table?
gonna say something. It's almost 8 o'clock is when we're supposed to adjourn. And I'm one who has to drive 3.5 hours home. And we've talked about recreational, we've talked about commercial. I want to make a recommendation, we adopt the mayor approved recommendation, of which is 5I, and make a motion. Is that right? That we recommend that. So I make a motion to do that, so we can speed things up and get along and vote on something. Which is the recommended recreational in blue.
Under combination management.
Yes,
It's under combination, so this would be the January,
table
February,
2.8.
February closure, 3 fish bag limit, 14 to 20 slot, 1/26. Those are all recreational measures.
We're not talking about commercial. This is purely, purely recreational.
So start with that one to recommend. That seems to be the critical one.
And we need to get a second if we're gonna get one. We're
Well,
gonna
they
get-
finally speaking for spectrum trial are in January and February, is it on?
Some people go out there.
Commercial people.
Sounds cold to me.
I don't know. We have a second.
So we have a second. Any, Sam?
Sam, okay.
So we have a motion on the table to approve combination management, recommend approval of combination management measure 5.9. Again, our votes are just saying as a committee that we support this management measure, so the commission has an understanding of where we stand. And Jeremy, I was wondering, you were on the Sea Trout Committee. You know, was there, you know, generally support within that committee for, you know, these, you know, an approach that has that January, February closure, lowers the recreational bag to 3. Clearly, there's been a lot of talk and support about a slot limit for fish over 26. Anything that, you know, sort of gives you pause about that from that, based on the discussions within that committee that maybe we're not aware of on our committee?
Believe it was the lesser of the evils was the conclusion. If we had to make a, you know, a change, I think we were there for 3 days. There was a lot of discussion.
There's a lot of discussion.
But you guys did it as a 3-day sort
Yeah, it was
of
a-
convention?
Yeah, so it was a lot, and it's been a while. Can't remember when it was, months ago, but
March.
Yeah, anyway,
It was a while ago.
6 months.
there was a lot of different opinions there, and it depends on, just like tonight, who you ask about. But it was one of the lesser of the evils.
Other discussion about that particular motion?
Me, the slot limit is in mighty narrow. My primary concern is discard mortality and discards. That narrow a slot, 40, you're talking 6 inches from that big to that big. The amount of discards is going to be horrendous. Yeah, and setting aside survivability. Just the amount of discards is going to be horrendous. And those numbers that you were seeing out of Merck was 18 million. You might see 24 million. That to me is scary. Is the amount of mortality associated with.
I'll say this, it does, you know, reduce 39.5% out of the recreational. I'm a recreational fisherman, and it comes out of my hide. And, recreational's got to do their part in this, and they are the biggest user group in this. So whether we increase discards or decrease discards, that is all unquantifiable to any degree. And, we can argue about survivability till tomorrow. But sometimes you gotta say, we're gonna make a recommendation. Marine Fisheries Commission is gonna make the final decision. We're just making a recommendation
Exactly.
and going on from there. So we need to make a recommendation. This does what we're do, and I believe it's a fair thing to do.
Also seen, Tom, there's a lot of promotion out there with the recreational fishery, the pro back over 20. Okay, so there's already a promotion out there that's putting.
These are the great eats. These are the nice eating size fish. So, I mean, if you want to kill them and eat them, these are the right size to do.
Yeah.
And anybody's a knucklehead sits up
Smaller
on,
14-inch trout.
well, anybody wants to sit on a bunch of 10, 12-inch trout and catch them all day.
I think
Pox
they'll
on them.
stop you anyway.
Pox on them is the way I see it.
This thing won't stop you from doing it.
Knuckleheads will do what knuckleheads do.
You can close the fishery down statewide completely.
And you'll still have discards.
Yeah.
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 You can't get rid of discards if you allow fishing at all, or in any type.
Exactly.
So,
But, I mean, you know,
called or.
speckled trout are pretty prolific critters. I mean, they are. They're like hard crab. Talked about the other day, you know, they have lots and lots and lots of babies. And they grow really, really, really fast until they're 4 years old. Then they stop that, but you know, it's nothing like a drum. They grow really, really, really fast for the first 4 years. Then they slow them down.
Tom,
I don't know.
I think you're boxing yourself in a corner, buddy.
I'm just trying to get this speeded along.
Yeah.
You don't have a recommendation, a motion on the floor, you can't get a vote, and you can't figure out what to do.
Exactly.
Y'all may want to vote it down, but what I said is, let's do something and have a vote and see where it goes.
Well, I think we should call the question.
So all in favor of this, of supporting this motion, 5 within the combination measures, we have 7 people here. So all in favor, we don't have to do it one at a time. We can just raise our hands and all in favor of this motion, which was recommended by the division, 5 aye. So we have 4 yeses. Opposed? This motion? None? Abstain? So you guys abstaining? Abstaining. Pam, you abstaining? Or you
You
voted?
gotta make a stand, people.
Did you vote yes, Pam?
I did, but yes.
Okay, I didn't see it. Okay. So Sam voted yes. 5, it was 5. Sam voted yes, I voted yes.
Voted yes.
I voted yes, Pam voted yes, and so did Jason.
503.
Yeah. We have 502, 2 abstentions, right?
Yep.
So 2 abstentions.
Now we move on to,
Well, and we don't have to make a recommendation on every one. I would like to make a recommendation on the season closures. I know I'm the chair, but I can still make a motion. But I make a motion that we extend the closure after a cold stun through June 30th. Right now, it's only closed to June 15th. It
I'll
extends
make
that
that
closure.
motion for you. I'll make the motion, we extend the closure to June 30 after a severe cold stun.
And that's what it is now, right?
Goes till June 15th.
Go to June 15 when we go.
They just want to go to the end of June and make sure that they get
I
that
mean-
first big wave of spawning a chance to spawn.
That's, that 15th was pretty random.
Yeah.
Sounds like.
You seconded,
In that last,
Sam second.
Sam seconded.
Seconded.
in that last supplement, the commercial had a 10%, occupancy, 50 pounds, does that still apply? During the closed season.
So in our current recommendation, that would not. I believe our current recommendation for that protocol would be a complete closure without a bycatch
Okay.
allowance.
Make an amendment to the motion then.
Friendly amendment, but what was that? What would it be?
In the last supplement, we had a 10% bycatch allowance and because we're fishing for mullet and everything else and
That
catch
doesn't
a
change
trout.
this.
And there was no need to throw the trout over. We caught it.
Well, this motion.
This motion was not about
Anything about that. This is purely about extending the closure for a cold stun
For trout.
for trout until June 30.
I agree 100%.
And
Except,
what you're asking for is something separate.
well, no, because inside that closure previously in the supplement, there was a 10% bycatch allowance up to 50 pounds. And that's what I was asking Lucas if it included it.
So I think there was a year that there was one of the fisheries closures, I believe there was some sort of allowance. But I'm relatively certain in most of those closures, there was not.
Closure is closure.
Yeah. I think the first time they ever closed the fishery, maybe there was some allowance for like scuba and already frozen fish or something like that.
No.
But I'm relatively certain every single year after that, it's been, when it's closed without any sort of allowance or additional
I'll
harvest.
see if I can find the information, because I just read it yesterday. Oh,
My motion is for closure.
Okay.
And that's what
Through
we're
June 30th.
through June 30.
30th after a cold stun event, just to extend it.
2
Any
weeks.
question on that motion?
Tom, if you don't mind just reading the motion, just to make sure that I have it captured correctly on the screen.
Yeah, I mean,
All in favor of that motion to extend the closure through June 30th after a Cold Stone event? Any opposed? Any abstain? Yeah, so everybody agreed to that. And Ken, I think you can get clarification on that, sort of, based with the management section, just to see where things stand with that allowance.
My understanding, all those options that were currently existed extended through the period of time until this amendment takes precedent.
Right.
So that's what I'm asking, if we can extend those same regulations into this. They are still in existence.
That's a comment you can add for review. Just leave it at that. I don't think we got to go through the whole gyration.
I mean, I can certainly dig into that and offer and get you some clarification.
Well, I mean, what clarification, really, I mean, the rule existed. And
But-
it hasn't been changed since it was existed or created. Okay, it hasn't, so we're still operating under that FMP management.
Yes, we are still operating under Supplement A to the Spotted Sea Trout FMP until Amendment 1 is approved for management.
Correct.
Yes, that is the case.
So everything should be the same. Supplements are just adding very specific things. And as well as updates, but the base plan is the same unless these supplements and other updates change
Thing
things.
is, if it's in there and allowable in a season closure, this would
It's
not
still
affect
there.
that. It's still there.
It's still there.
If it is there,
That's all.
If it is-
That's all I was.
if it is there.
If it is there and it's still there.
So again, until Amendment 1 gets final approval from the commission, the original FMP and Supplement A are how the Spotted Sea Trout fishery are managed. So if it is in those two things, yes, that will continue until Amendment 1 is approved. When Amendment 1 is approved, whatever management is voted on in Amendment 1 will be the Spotted Sea Trout management, and there will be some things that are explicitly carried forward, and then whatever else
That's
is
power to be
changed.
above us to figure out.
You're here.
And the one other thing I want us to do is recommend that on the 4 hire vessels, that the captain make whatever limit be jerked out. However you want to word that.
You don't want me to write dirt
So
down
you're
there?
making a motion to support the elimination of the captain crew allowance on full
Yes.
hire trips.
It's Appendix 3, 1.b.
Is there a second on that motion to eliminate the
I mean, they.
captain crew allowance for spotted sea trout on for hire trips?
What did they say about that on the Speckled Trout Committee?
We had a representative from the, profession, and they weren't against it. Obviously, it's not, beneficial to them, but they weren't against losing that. Something they were willing
I
to.
mean, if I go on a charter, I got a X fish limit. I shouldn't be catching limit or the mate's limit or whatever it may be. And if the captain runs 2 crews a day, you could double up that. So it just seems fair that an individual catches their limit. You don't catch somebody else's. So that's.
I'll second that motion. All in favor of that motion, or any, all in favor of that motion? You know, approve that one. I also wanted to just make a motion about the adaptive management. You know, so there's the adaptive management in the issue paper for just sustainable harvest. And then there's also adaptive management for the cold stone net, you know, so allowing the division director to have some ability to make some changes regarding sustainable harvest and cold stone events quickly if they need to, which would include only the management measures that are in place already that they could adjust, not bringing new things in, right? But just giving them that flexibility to be able to respond quickly if there's a concern. I would make a motion to support adaptive management in both of those cases.
Second it. You're talking about option 7, adaptive management, and then option,
Yeah,
Option 4.
yeah, one of them is under the sustainable harvest issue.
Yeah.
Right? And then, that's
The other
option
one-
7, and the other one, option 4, is under the cold stone specific issue. But they both sort of just allow the director some latitude in those two scenarios to make some modifications to existing management. They can't introduce new things. They can just tweak things that are already there.
I've got a question before we vote, in the discussion phase. Adaptive management is like really new.
It is.
It's like really, really new. I do really, I wish I felt more comfortable with the idea of adaptive management. What is the difference between that and proclamation authority? I know there is an important one, but I can't remember what it is. I mean, in the past, a director has been able to, and Kathy was here, right now Kathy's still here. So anyway, but in the past and for many years, the directors had the ability to take emergency measures very quickly. And I'm not sure how this adaptive management is any different or any better than that scenario. Do you have any ideas
As
of
I
it?
understand it, it's not proclamation is the change that the director makes. In this case, this would allow the division staff to to adapt.
But the director still got to approve it. I mean,
No, I
under,
think it has to I think it has to be approved by the commission.
under
It
two,
just gives them the ability to do it.
this right here, that's all in proclamation authority, every bit of it.
Yes.
You're right, Pam. So what Proc Authority does is it allows the director the tool to use the proclamations to issue. One rule that it ties back to is HO 13, which allows variable conditions. One of the variable conditions in that rule is if the director then could use proclamation authority through an FMP. And so what adaptive management does is allow the nimbleness of specific measures within a plan that's framed very specifically that he or she can then use if an event occurs in between amendments. So all plans are within 5-year reviews, open up, and you know how long it takes, some long,
Oh, I
5
know.
years. So the adaptive management allows that a little bit more nimbleness within the frame of the adaptive management within each of the plans to allow our director to have that proclamation authority to issue what's in those.
But the
frames.
director's got proclamation authority anyway, over all these things,
No,
unless they rescinded it. Did they rescind it?
Yep, due time.
Did they rescind the proclamation authority to the director?
Yeah, they change things all the time.
right, but the plan, the FMP then allows the commission then to give more balance in what goes into these.
So you're giving more power to the commission.
Yeah,
No.
it's
Has a.
commission, but this is also built upon public comment. So this right here, these plans are developed beyond just the commission. It's the input from the public too, that's built those in. So you do have to think about that. It's more of a process with a bigger group rather than one or two people deciding thou shalt do this.
Right.
That is-
I'm just
Doesn't
saying,
make you, but doesn't make you more susceptible to quote unquote knee jerk reactions, like we got one bubble above the line.
I have never been very satisfied with this whole idea of adaptive management.
So
It
Pam,
just seems so unnecessary.
you said that it's only just started, but can you give an example where you've seen adaptive management used and you didn't like what it produced in recent times?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you.
Is there a time in recent times where we've used adaptive management in a plan that you think did not work well or wasn't useful?
Mullet fishery.
Well, there's that. And I mean, with maybe crabs also,
No, adaptive management though. I'm not talking what comes in a plan as the strategies. I'm actually saying adaptive management that's used after a plan is adopted, but then in between review periods of your amendments.
Well, when we review, we put down rules and we sit here and we suggest this thing or that thing through the FMP process. And the next opportunity to change those is it comes back up for review. 3 to 5 years later. I'm not sure why you would, I mean, 3 to 5 years in my view is not very long. Because every other, you wake up now, my gosh, here we are, looking at speckled trout yet again. And so, I mean, I just don't see where it's really needed. I'm just, I don't know that much about it, I'll be honest with you.
May allow you to change things if stuff's not working before the next plan.
Yes.
Mullet's.
Yeah, after the-
Mullet's a good example. They came out and they said, well, it's not overfished and not occurring. And then a year later, here they come back and, oh, we got raised the benchmark up 5% so we can be up here and improve the budget.
Yes. Like that, instead of waiting out the
That
prescribed
is-
period of time.
That is actually incorrect. So it was the target that was raised 5%. But what defines whether overfishing is occurring or a stock is overfished is the threshold. So that it was enacted, that 5% was to basically separate those a little bit, to give more breathing room in between those. But that did not change anything about what would decide whether a stock is overfished or overfishing is occurring for
But
mullet.
there's not a single,
Well-
there's not a single commercial fisherman that was sitting at that table, and I was one of them. And there must have been 50 in the rig that know good and well that once they raise that benchmark, well, here come regulations.
But that's not adaptive management.
No,
So that's a whole other,
no, that isn't.
so that's.
But still, I still say, the director has proclamation authority over everything in number 2, season closures, all 9 yards of it. And if it is deemed necessary, and they can last, I mean, they'll put in the proclamation and it doesn't have a terminus. There's no end date to it, So it could go on until he rescinds it or she rescinds it, until the next FMP. And it's something that can be done like that. I mean, it's very powerful. And so I just don't want to double up on all this stuff.
But most all of these things that we've passed or recommended in the past several years have had adaptive management as part of them and recommended as part of them. And we have approved them to give them authority if things significantly change. And I don't see a reason, it's not saying tomorrow they're gonna come and close the whole fishery. It just comes down to, they need to have some flexibility if things substantially change. And it may change for the good and they can be more flexible.
And it might, but
But if you don't have anything, you're stuck what it is for 5 years, no good or bad.
right.
Is that-
And it's just like with the supplement process. I mean, the supplement process has been used for good. It's been used for bad.
It can,
I mean, it's like anything else.
like everything else.
I just feel like it's just another layer,
Yep.
It's just another layer. But that's just me. I mean, like I said, I didn't get it, but that's just my.
I think the way that the FMP process was originally set up, with every 5 years, was to made a change, and you had enough time to look at it and see what the effect of the change over a longer period of time. So with that ability to look at it over a longer period of time, when you come in with adaptive management in the middle of it and you change it, well, now it's not what it was, and that's not what we had planned. So we're gonna change it, and we're gonna do this now.
But I think,
And you never end up seeing what the end result of the original changes have been made, what it was.
But I think the adaptive management framework in terms of looking at things like a seasonal closure, trip limit, right? They're all intended to achieve a harvest reduction, right? And the idea is that they can't account for human behavior And sometimes they can see quickly, within the first year, that this measure that they thought was going to achieve a certain reduction didn't actually do it because there was a huge shift in behavior, or people changed how they were doing things.
How you know,
This allows-
how do you know it wasn't an environmental change?
But, they can look at effort patterns and landings patterns and say, look, we need to do more because the removal rate is not, we thought we were gonna knock it back to this and it's not. We have no chance of ending overfishing if we don't modify this closure and make it shorter or longer, whatever needs to be done. And that's what this framework does. It gives them that ability, and it's not, it's not just the division director. it's-
What that premise does is, and right now you're saying 3 fish, okay? Good, well, fine. Well, adaptive management comes in and says, well, that's not working. Now you can only have 1 fish.
But don't you have to go through the whole process? Don't you have to go through the whole process where you can make a change like that?
No, I mean, I think that's the point, is you can make changes to the existing management strategies. You can't add a new
And
strategy.
who makes the changes? Who decides that?
The division.
The Division of Marine Fisheries,
Yes.
without any input from anybody.
I don't know the framework of how they get input.
I can't imagine a situation where we would not seek out input from anybody.
Have you ever
Um,
made, changes through adaptive management?
Not for spotted sea trout, because we
Or
have
for
an
anything.
adaptive management framework.
Give us a-
For anything, I don't care what it is.
That's Diamondback terrapin,
Yeah.
excluders in the Mason Borough area. And that was a part of the adaptive management framework. Once more information was introduced from onboard sampling with fishermen, scientific study to look at the Diamondback terrapins in that particular area. So that is a good example of an adaptive management approach to balance the needs of the Diamondback terrapin to the pot fisheries in those areas, and look at the excluder devices that could still allow the use of that gear so long as it wasn't taking Diamondback terrapins.
So they used it as an area, they just said closed an area for X amount of time.
Yeah, and that's in force now with 2 areas. I can't remember off the top of my head, but they defined certain closed areas where the impacts of Diamondback terrapins were identified with researchers. And then they also worked with Sam Romano and a couple other hot fishermen to look at different excluder devices that would work in their circumstances. And it seemed to be effective in order to then apply those proclamation authorities to the director to have certain closure windows that then were more beneficial to the Diamondback terrapins when they're
So that-
back to be.
So that's how proclamation authority fits in here.
Right, so, and it has the frame usually specific, sometimes a little bit more broad. For that particular instance, it was more specific, and it did require, I believe, input from the crustacean committee and the commission on the areas. So that is a pretty recent one.
I'm just
I call
gonna
the
say,
question.
we'll call the question. I'm just gonna say, I'm gonna be smiling the rest of the meeting, not because of anything we're talking about. My son just texted me that the New York Mets just beat the Phillies.
It's sad.
It's important for him.
As a long suffering fan, I'm very, very excited.
That is very good.
So
So anyway, yeah.
we're gonna call the question on just supporting adaptive management, both in the sustainable fisheries as well as in the cold stuff. All in favor of the support of adaptive management? Any opposed to adaptive management?
I'm not opposed to it, but I'm not, I don't know, I guess, I didn't know enough about it. I mean, I'm not convinced.
Kennedy, you gonna?
No news there.
Adaptive management? No. Jeremy, abstaining? Okay. So we have 3 abstentions.
One other thing we talked about was just based on the commercial size limits, keeping those. Do we want to vote on keeping commercial size limits? Or I propose a motion that we maintain the status quo for the commercial size limits based on that information that we bring. On that.
I'll give him a second.
Say that one more time, Sam.
So we just,
Agreeing with the status quo for no change to commercial size limit.
just option 1A.
Option 1A.
So no change to commercial size limit.
Need to clarify, it's option 1A from appendix
We've
2,
already done
because
vessel
there's an
limits.
option 1.
What's that?
We've already done vessel limits.
No.
Appendix 2 is-
We don't have to do anything with any of it.
Well, yeah,
I-
let's discuss this motion here, the size, the motion on the table that was seconded was just to support the division's recommendation of no change to the commercial size. Any discussion about that particular motion? Again, that was supported by the fact that there, regardless of gill net mesh size and the small mesh gill net fishery, it didn't really impact what you catch. All of those mesh sizes do a good job of not catching undersized fish, so. All in favor? Status quo on commercial size limit, any opposed? 7-0.
Thank you.
Ken, the motion about trip limits was also, the recommendation was also status quo on commercial trip limits. The division didn't view that as.
There's a vessel limit here. That's what I was hoping to get a motion on for allowing 2 licenses. Vessel to have 2 allocations, 1 year limit.
Vessel limits
So-
is focused on the
Vessel limits in this is strictly.
strictly commercial, strictly recreational for hire.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, it wasn't directed at commercial vessel.
I'd still like to make a motion if I could, please.
So what's the motion?
Motion to allow 2 commercial licenses on 1 vessel. Have 2 allocations of fish with 1 allocation.
So 2 licenses, but just on a single vessel. So the limits would just apply to the licenses, not the vessel.
Correct.
And is that?
Are you
is that
talking
a-
about like they do for clams?
Do for everything.
Yeah, you can get
For everything out to do the same thing for
Yeah,
commercial
oyster.
or recreational. You can have 6-pack on a boat and they each got a real limit. They could all have fish. When there's 2 licensed, commercial license on the boat, I'm saying you can have 2 allocations of fish for that boat, but only 1 allocation of gear. That takes your gear out of the water.
So is that allowed now?
No,
Not allowed now.
no.
They allow it in the oyster fishery and clam fishery. That's the only place I know about that.
It's not allowed in any fin fish, correct?
I don't think so.
Yeah,
I think so either.
I didn't know.
This is-
If somebody else may know more about that.
We allowed 2 on that one. As long as you had 2. The Flounder pound net prop would just be shoot, they allowed it on the commercial vessels for pound nets.
So you could have,
So
you
there
could
are
have 2,
instances-
you could have 2 limits on a single boat.
Yeah, with 2 licenses.
It's all with 2 license holders.
Instead of kids.
Well, I'm saying, I do, it is for shellfish. I don't know about the rest.
Right,
You get 1 boat, 1 complement of gear.
but you could have 2 license holders.
Right.
And does the motion that I have up there, capture your intent?
No. Add one limit of gear.
So limit it to 1 set of gear,
Right.
set of gear. 2 commercial licensed individuals, that's 2 trip limits.
In other words, if I want to get on this man's boat, and we go fishing, we can catch my limit and his limit.
Yeah.
But we can only use 1 limit of gear.
Understand? Is there a second for that motion?
Second.
Any discussion about that, concerns about that? Seems efficient, so I don't see a real issue.
I mean, I know it's done in other fisheries, but
When you got to pay to vote, you,
I mean, it seems like there'd be less discards.
and then at the same time, if you're talking trout, the time we're working in the winter, and you sending one guy out there on the boat, if he falls overboard, he's in trouble. So it's a safety issue as well.
Call the question, all in favor of that motion? Sort of.
I'll vote for it.
So that's a reason. Yeah, I don't really care how you catch the fish.
And I think the fact that only allowing one gear made a difference to me. Now comes the question, it's not on the recommendations, it's do we allow commercial fishing when the recreational fishing season's closed on our recommendation? January, February.
Oh, okay, so. I
Could
think-
we address that?
Well, I think it's in here, right? Is there a January, February commercial closure in here or not?
Yeah, so the division's preliminary recommendation includes a total statewide harvest closure for both sectors in January and February.
We voted that in.
You have not yet.
I make a recommendation we do that.
So
Close the commercial season in conjunction with the recreational season.
for those 2 months.
And I'm not gonna talk about trip limits or any of that stuff. Closure at the same time.
Is there a second for that motion to match the commercial closure in January, February with the recreational closure?
Your recommendation was also for them to close from Friday to Tuesday,
In
November to December,
yes, the division.
all in
preliminary-
January and February.
Yep,
Are you just focusing on just the January,
I'm just
February?
looking at that portion. The other one is really a user conflict issue
Right.
that we're trying to address.
partially, and it's partially that one of the things we've heard throughout this process is also, try to consider other FMPs and the management that is put into place in those.
Yeah.
And these two fisheries are
The lineup.
pretty closely related. They happen in tandem most of the time. So it made sense.
Somebody gonna second or we gonna die?
So we're just focused.
I mean-
February.
That's it.
I'll second it.
Is
just so we
is
can-
there, what is your, I mean, is there much of a, I mean, I know you just showed it on your slide, which has been so long ago, I forgot what it said.
January, February,
January, February,
it's about 12% of harvest.
Yeah, it's all right, 8:30.
I didn't know much about it, I swear no. I figured it was too cold for any kind of fishing anyway. Drought, they move very swift when it's cold.
When you got to break ice and you leave the dock at 8 o'clock, but
It's
you
cold.
come back at 4 o'clock and breaking ice to get back to the dock for 6 miles.
I didn't think that's a very good thing. And it's gonna be a cold stone in that situation, so you can't go fishing. I mean,
Can we call the
I
question?
mean, I just, again, I don't know very much about it.
I'm
What do you think, Jeremy?
Well, I'm about to tell you after we vote on this.
I need to know your opinion before we vote.
Well, I don't agree with it. I don't, that's all. I have to say.
So you saying our crowd,
This is one of the last things we have to do at that time of year, right now.
oh, so you are out there fishing for speckled trout or this time?
There's not much else to fish for, you know what I mean?
Okay,
Does this work in tandem with the other proposal here that you close it, during mullet season for the, now you can't mullet? Is that the same thing as this or is it?
What other fisheries are you closing at this same time or in various things already?
In the January, February time, I mean, flounder would be closed during that time. Striped bass would be closed during that time. Mullet will be open.
To
But I
go
mean,
for mullet.
there's a proposal there to include trout during mullet season. Same hours.
Yeah, the division's preliminary recommendation, yeah, absolutely.
That's
That's
their
what-
recommendation,
What
but
I'm
that's
saying,
not,
are.
that's not this motion.
That's not, we're not recommending that.
That's just
Motion
saying
just started.
January, February.
So their motion is to, put 11:59 PM Friday to 12:01 Tuesday.
That's
October 1st to December 31st.
Right.
And January and February.
Yeah, but you
And
can,
exactly.
you can break it up into two different motions and that's what I did.
Oh, we're talking about
Motion is just to-
January and February, not those weekends.
Just January, February.
I mean, as I understand it, right, just for clarification, the January, February closure of the commercial fishery is where most of their reduction is coming.
Yes.
Because there's nothing else in here except for that one motion, right? We're not changing size, we're not changing trip limits.
So it's about, probably a little more than half of the, commercial reduction comes from that January, February closure. The other half comes from the weekend closure in fall.
Closure.
Can you
Assuming that
pull up that
there's
graph?
Got to yet.
reallocation, right?
Yes, there is certainly the opportunity for recoupment there. And that's one of the things we discussed a lot. We talked about potentially mirroring, all of the mullet closures where it's weekend closures, just different weekend closures, not in the fall. But that recoupment was a concern. Because unlike mullet, spotted sea trout don't leave the system. They just aggregate tighter and tighter and actually become more and more susceptible to harvest.
No, we're not in the same place you harvest and mullets at.
No, I'm not necessarily saying that. I'm just saying as, the benefit to mullet closure is that if you get a good flow on the weekend, mullet exit the system to go spawn. That's not the case with spotted sea trout. They're aggregating tighter and tighter.
They're not aggregating where the mullets are located.
No, I'm not saying that they are.
Well,
I'm saying that spotted sea trout life history says that in the winter, they are aggregating spotted sea trout are aggregating tighter and tighter, whereas mullet are leaving the system. So a weekend closure is more likely to be effective, just a weekend closure, than with spotted sea trout.
when the spotted sea trout are aggregated, they stay in the inlet maybe a day or two at the most, at the very most, and then they're straight up the river. And when they go to the head, to the inland waters, and that's where we're gonna run into a problem with wildlife, because
I mean, not on the commercial side of things, because there is no harvest of spotted sea trout in the inland waters already.
right, but you still, oh, this is just for commercial.
Just for commercial. We've already recommended.
We've
that
already
we close it.
Tom's message is to match the recreational closure January, February.
That's it.
So on this chart here on page 40 out of this plan, there's a chart at the top that says spotted sea trout from October to February. That's where most of them are caught. And the least amount are being caught in the summer. July, end of June, July through September. But that's when you catch mullet, is during that time of year. And then on into the fall and it starts falling off.
When you mullet fish, you're gonna catch a few trout. There's no way around it. Same thing with red drum. You're gonna catch a few red. Ain't no way around it.
But it would be closed during that time if the mullet.
And mullets are, it's mullet,
Well, that's,
are they closed during this time?
During the weekends, Friday midnight till Monday.
Monday. So why can't we just be consistent with that?
Well, that's what the DMS recommended.
Oh, okay.
But this is not the same as that. This is
They recommended both together.
correct.
What I put up here was one half of what they recommended.
If we
Exactly.
don't, like,
But we could come
But,
back.
but you want to put the other half in
The other.
there.
Doesn't include.
I don't know any of it.
Okay, I got it. That, well, you're my kind of feller then. I don't want any of it for anybody. And
I thought I was your kind of fellow.
I don't want any of it for anybody to have it anymore because they spawn just like, cat
I know.
or crab. I mean,
Let's
there's
call-
plenty of them.
let's
There's
call
so
this
much
question.
fishing.
Let's call the question for whether we recommend a commercial closure in January, February to match the recreational closure during those same 2 months. We have a motion that's been seconded. All in favor of the January, February commercial closure? Any opposed? 3 opposed, so 4-3. We don't have to make a I'm not a big fan of the weekend recommendation stuff, partly because, well, I mean, again, it's a user group conflict thing and at one point, but it also can then, if people don't change their behavior, it causes, it leads to a reduction. But a lot of times you get behavior changes and then the point. I would rather than do it with just a flat closure if you need more reduction, but you're getting a good amount of the commercial reduction in January, February, at least more than half of it. I would be okay with just leaving the weekend to the commission.
At a very point in time when there ain't nothing else around, ain't nothing else to do, and that's the only money you can make.
But it's the only time to have the reduction where the commercial is having their equitable share of the reduction is when they fish them.
And it's only a portion.
So just to put that in context, January to February, is a little bit over a 21% reduction in harvest.
That's all it's needed to meet the.
That would meet the statutory requirement.
So it's meeting the overfishing statute reduction.
Coming out of here.
There is no, there's no overfishing.
Well,
That's the problem. No overfishing.
Anything else we need to address?
Is there
What
any
are we
other
doing?
questions?
Is there anything about stop nets?
Does anybody have any particular issue? I don't know much about that fishery, so I wasn't planning to address it.
The
but-
quote is the same anyway, so would the change make much difference? That's what I was.
This is
There-
to formalize it.
Yep. They're already limited by a
It's a
pretty tight quota and they've never actually hit that quota. But right now it's exactly like Tina said, it's managed through, pretty much a handshake agreement. And we're just looking to formalize that exact same management in Amendment 1.
already in the status quo.
Well, it's not changing anything. Like I said, they're just formalizing what's
Yep.
already being done.
We're not looking to change that,
Which is status quo. Very.
That's basically the same thing they said when they raised.
Change it, what you're going to do. I don't have an opinion about it, honestly. It's such a small percentage of the.
I don't either.
They will take care of it up there.
Make it, well, I don't know.
Stay for it.
I'm not messing with.
Make a motion for a.
Make a motion to adjourn.
Make a motion about none.
Nick made a motion for 4A. Keep the status quo.
Is it seconded by anyone? To just use status quo?
They even want to use status quo to keep it outlined in the memorandum of the MOA.
Right. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
You guys want to call the question? Support that motion to just keep 4A under stop nets instead of 4B, which is where the season quota stays the same. Terms and conditions of the stop net fishery and responsibilities of the stop net crew are outlined in a memorandum of agreement.
Yeah, they're currently in the MOA, but you're trying to get them formalized in plan.
it makes life a little bit easier on the Spotted Sea Trout lead, and it makes my understanding formalizes, director role as proclamation authority over that, fishery a little more, it just spells it out a little more clearly. There's a lot of person hours that go into getting that MOA signed and you know, tracking down those signatures. The proclamations to open that fishery can't really be issued until that signature is tracked down, and it has to happen every single year. So it's basically just looking to take that portion off of it so that it is just outlined in the fishery management plan. Like literally the portion of the management plan, like when we wrote it, we took it from the MOA and just wrote it right into the plan. There was nothing changed. There was nothing different about it. It's just now we don't have to go track down the one gentleman who still participates in that fishery and get his signature on a piece of paper.
Yeah. You bring me for exactly one, maybe two people. But, they'll sit there, these boys sit on the beach for weeks at a time, not making a penny.
Yeah, we're not looking to change any of that, Ken.
Right.
We're not looking to change any of that. Literally, all we're looking to do is just does not have to go get his signature.
Make a swipe.
All we're looking to do.
They're not looking to change anything.
We're not looking to change a single piece of that.
I think the memorandum should stay right where it's at. I understand it's a little bit more cumbersome. Don't use that word, but there's a memorandum there, there's agreement between the division and those people, and let them work it out. Why should I sit here and vote on something that they're supposed to be agreeing on? I'm not gonna make
I
somebody.
just want to formalize it. That's all.
So call the question to support option A, right? Not B, but A, which is to keep the memorandum of agreement. So we call that question, all in favor of keeping 4A? Any opposed to keeping 4A? Going to abstain too. So 3-2-2. They'll read, the commission will see those vote numbers and say they either were fairly indifferent to to go home. They'll see that.
We're worn down.
One down.
They'll focus.
I know I am. I
Seven,
know about y'all.
Not the 3-2-2s.
Lordy.
Anything else?
If there's no other motions related to speckled trout, Jesse did want to just address the next meeting time.
And I'm very glad I get to because I had to end a meeting early today. I ended it 6 minutes early and I hate ending meetings early. So I get to extend this one a little bit longer and I'm hoping Kat are loving it back there. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about the next meeting will be about the oyster fisheries management plan and the clam fisheries management plan. And right now that meeting is scheduled to take place in January. And I kind of just wanted to bring it up here at the committee level and see if there was any interest in that meeting taking place in December before the holidays rather than in January after the holidays. If there's a preference one way or the other, just, we know this Court of Appeals ruling where we have to bring everybody in person is kind of onerous. So we want to make it as easy on y'all as possible. So if a meeting in December is better than a meeting in January, please let us know and we can try to accommodate that.
It's hard without a particular day to say which one's better.
Yeah, I don't know if I have a preference.
I know I do. I got a lot going on in December.
Rather.
I got a festival. I got grandkids to have Christmas. I mean, I'd rather not have it in December.
Well, option 3 is all of us getting together on Christmas.
Yeah,
You bring it.
right.
Don't bring your prize, Pam.
My sister does live up the road here. So,
Good, is that meeting, is it good possible to have that meeting in Moorhead? I mean, I know
Yes.
usually this committee, we try to move around, so.
It's easier for me to be here.
Okay.
It's 2 hours.
I just know that Pam's up closer to Moorhead. I don't know where Jeremy, where are you based?
Moorhead.
Oh, what about Ken? Where are you based out of?
Hour and 37 minutes away.
From closer to Moorhead or?
Closer.
Oh, you're closer to Moorhead too, okay. So it might be Moorhead.
Might be.
Okay.
I think I drove
Talk
as
about it.
long as Tom did today.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. I mean, that traffic, it was horrendous.
Yeah.
I mean, the whole way,
I gotta go.
the whole way down 24,
Get this over.
it's bumper to bumper.
Get a hotel.
I gotta be somewhere at 7:30 in the
It
morning.
was a bloody nightmare.
So we can leave it for January for now.
Yeah.
Sounds like
Sounds good to me.
there's no push to move it to December.
Right.
Yeah. Any other business from the? So I was gonna,
Any update from them? I have no idea. Usually do an update.
Marine Fisheries Commission
Yeah.
update.
I think they'll send it to us now, right?
We can send it to you. I can talk a little bit about what happened at the August commission meeting if you'd like.
Briefly.
So I can be,
It doesn't.
well, let's see, I'm trying to see how long I can take with this and, sorry, so there was discussion at the commission, as y'all know, because we just brought it to you about the spotted sea trout, the draft spotted sea trout fishery management plan amendment 1. There was a lot of discussion there about having some additional options included in that they didn't see readily. So that was some stuff that we worked on before we brought it to y'all, just so we could see that more. They received an update on the blue crab adaptive management that this committee met about in September. We'll take that back to them in November, another update, and then that will actually be coming back to y'all most likely in April. There was quite a bit of talk at the August meeting about flounder, which is not surprising because everybody loves flounder. It's very, very fun to talk about. The commission did vote to ask the secretary to open up the flounder fisheries management plan back up to go ahead and start work with Amendment 4. We don't have word yet from the department whether or not the secretary wants to open up that amendment. We hope to hear within the next couple of weeks whether or not that will happen. And that was the major topics that was talked about at the commission that I'm remembering off the top of my head anyway. There was, the commission has voted to move forward with rulemaking for false albacore management, for pot marking requirements in the crab pot fishery to simplify those requirements, and also for some data collection and harassment rules.
Yeah, the wildlife violation.
Wildlife Violator Compact, that's it. Which if you would like to know more about the Interstate Wildlife Violator Compact, I'm happy to talk about it for the next 15 or 20 minutes. That sounds
Thank you.
I'm so here.
So, just a, little bit of business that tonight was gonna be my last meeting on this committee because they finally pulled me into the dark side at the university and I'm in a 4-year prison sentence as the department chair.
Oh, yikes.
Sounds as bad as it is, or is as bad as it sounds. But God, I love you guys. So I'm gonna stay on for a little while longer. So I'll be here for the January meeting and then we'll go from there. We'll sort of play it by ear. So it's good to see you guys. Appreciate it.
We adjourn.
We are adjourned.
We are adjourned.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll do.
I know, right? I'm gonna try to be.
Yeah, we really appreciate it, Fred.
Well,
It's on the same fence.
you do say.
Either way.
Internet link on.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, perfect.
I tried to look back. Over the commission.